We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Whoa, what am I doing here on a Friday afternoon before Green Rush Live? You want to know? It's a special live edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, and I am joined by the one and only Fred Smith. Now, we all know there are quite a few Fred Smiths out there in the world, but trust me, there is only one that I know that knows everything there is to know about Facebook. Fred, thank you so much for joining us today.
What's good, bro? And the other side of me of that crowd is Freddie Volante. So they can have both in this case. They can have their cake and eat it too, bro. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And before we get into the do's and don'ts and the secret sauce when it comes to sneaking around the algorithms on Facebook that you seem to know so well, can you give us a little background about who you are and how the hell did you end up where you are?
Oh man, brother.
And try to give me the abridged version, and then we can get into how you and I met. How's that?
Oh, okay, that's fair. Well, it all began when I was an embryo, and then since then it's just been. No, we don't. You asked me how it began, bro.
I understand. We all have that in common too, right? We have that. Right. It's another one of those things we have in common. I love that.
Right. These people gotta understand, like I just me, and I just kind of just walk around this earth. And like when me and Jimmy met, he was just like, yo, like, who are you? I'm just like, who are you? And we just started talking. And then he's like this amazing genius, and he's just so humble about it. Hey, Jimmy, I told you, pull out your Emmy so everybody can see it.
Oh no, but it's injured. I was rushing around so much today. I knocked the Emmy off its base. And
dude, did anybody know that Jimmy was an Emmy award winning? Like, I'm not gonna say it on TV, but you know what I'm saying? It's just like,
this needs to be replaced, okay?
Hey, mail it to me, bro. You got my address. Let's go.
I'd like to earn another one, to be honest with you. Rather than replace it, I'm gonna earn another one. How's that?
Yeah, and first and foremost, let me be super clear. Shout out to Rico Lamite for connecting us. Rico's my partner in Cannapreneur. Also, Carlos from Superbad, he put me on when we were out there in 2020. Shout out to Cannabis Capital as well as Infused Digital, because we were out there doing it when nobody else was doing it. So that's how I learned how to move in this lane. And it's a whole bunch of people. Miss Kindness, everybody, please come through. Jojo from Row, everybody come through.
All right. Now, Rico is the one who's a more regular on our Green Rush Live show than Fred Smith has been. So I gave Fred his own segment leading into that show today. And I will promote the fact that we are going to have Edmund DeVeaux, who's the head of the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association, on with us right at the top of the hour. Rick Thompson from Michigan is going to be my co-host this week. And then we're going to get into international talk about cannabis. But for now, we've got Fred Smith. And people still don't quite know, where are you? You're in California. How did you end up in California? Because there was a road that ends up in California, wasn't there?
Yep. So what happened was, unfortunately, I'm just going to call it for what it is. The Black community doesn't talk about mental health. And, me and my mom had some falling outs, my whole family did, but I love her. I still honor her, and I cherish that energy. I just knew for a fact that I had to move a certain way in life, and I was compelled to do that. So I did whatever it took to get into California. And then from there, I did door-to-door sales for like 4 years. So I'm like, and then I started running the magazine crew with, shout out to everybody out there, Love, and everybody else in there, Joe, just everybody I'm still connected to, because I don't like to forget people. You know what I'm saying? This is a real journey in life that we're taking. And for me, it's always been like, why doesn't everybody else see this? Like, I don't think we have enough time on this planet. So that's how I move, with just a lot of intensity. But I also have moved with some of the world's like top movers and shakers that you know and don't know, because I just honor how people will show up to me. Like, I don't care. I'm Switzerland. I mess with everybody. I do my best to get them to understand that I really genuinely care. And, I've been vetted all the way down into the military lanes just to make sure that, my name carries weight, because I think everybody's name carries weight. But I wanted to show people how it's done step by step, because me, everything that I've said, I have a receipt for. So
that's right. Hey, you quickly mentioned your military background. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because it started with me actually I was a writer all my life. So back in the hood, I used to just I used to love getting the sales letters, like all the junk mail that everybody hated. I was like this, I would wait for them to just come. And the first thing I ever bought was called the Hume publication that was written by a guy named Gary Benson Vega. And then from there, the military just came into play because I knew that I had to serve my country. I mean, people don't like to say that, but I'm just like, you know what? I don't know nothing. They might know something. Let me just see what I don't know. So I wound up taking a test, and then I scored really high. The only school that's higher than that, actually, no, they're the exact same, is the nuclear school and the writing school. So it's just like, what? Right. But it makes sense because I'm talking to people in all different lanes my whole life as an advertiser. So I was technically proficiently trained on how to do this over 25 years ago. So it just translated into like the car business, and that's where I ran my whole career. So a lot of people know me in the car game. So, and I've played on the super high levels in some of those back end places, building out all of this stuff, whether it was curriculum or design, all of that stuff. So I know people right here, but this middle of the market, I've missed my whole life. But it wasn't until I started Freddie Volante in Hollywood, it challenged me. So my military career pivoted into all of this other stuff because I didn't know what else I could do, and from there, when I took the test, it says sales and marketing. I'm like, sales and marketing? I'm a public affairs guy. Like, that's not the same thing. And that's how I got around.
There you go. And it's a remarkable story just to get to where you are today. But the reason why we're here, as you know, this is Pro Cannabis Media. So What does this have to do with cannabis? Everybody always asks me, you get some interesting people on, but sometimes it's a stretch to figure out what this has to do with cannabis. Now, besides the fact that Cannapreneur and the CannaGather originator, Rico Lemit, is the one who brought us together, what does this have to do with cannabis, Fred?
It has everything to do with cannabis because cannabis is the plant of life. So for me, what happened was in the Persian Gulf, I almost died several times. I have PTSD as a result of it. Some of my friends watched me go through it. Some of them have lost their minds as a result of what they saw. So I got beat up pretty bad. I actually got stuck out there almost by myself for like 2 weeks on record. It was horrible. What happened was we were in real world time operations and our group had split up. So we had to make a choice. So for me, it brought life back into me because when I left from that huge multinational world for like 20 years, I was just leaving out in 2020. I finished up in Cincinnati, and then that's when the pandemic had hit. So Rico was one of my clients, and basically I told him one thing when he was doing it for CBD Sundays, and then he quadrupled his money in like 1 month. And he was like, yo, like, we're gonna stay together. And that's not the first time I did it either. I was on the manufacturing side a few years before I even met Rico, and I helped out one of the investors there. He got to 7 or 8 million in less than 9 months. And all of this is on record. So I started in the cannabis lane on the manufacturing side, helping build out also just before the vape crisis. And then during the pandemic is when I got back in. So I've just applied those skills that I have learned as an advertiser all of these years. And it might have shown up as, public affairs or sales or marketing and all this stuff. But in my world, it's all communication. So when I came into the cannabis lane, I'm just like, I'm seeing communicators from all over the world, and I love this. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm on one call with Rico, hanging out with people over here, all the way over here, right here, and we're all coming together. And that's what I had started in my New Room Collective. So Rico saw me online back in 2020, and literally he'll tell you the story. He was about ready to go out there due to all the riots and everything. And I teach what I call the half-second step back. So here's a cannabis leader. Rico's one of the top guys, 3 times TEDx speaker. He's been on stages. Everybody knows him out in most of these lanes. And he was ready to go out there and do something that was outside of his character. So I came in and literally saw that he was building out CannaVision. He put me on as his chief operating officer. And from there, that's when we started really understanding what this plant offers from a communication level. I'm not into the plant touching part. I'm not into the high level or the technical part. I'm just a communicator. I'm just here like, yo, what y'all need? I'm just coming through. And I have a lot of connections too. So that's how it is. The cannabis lane is very much so about connections.
And collaboration rather than
collaborations. Yeah. I want to be super clear on that too, because in my lane, I've worked with competitors and collaborators, and it depends on the season of the message in marketing as to when these things should happen. Sometimes you do have to have positive competition or the other type of competition. I don't care. I am agnostic to all of that stuff. What I know is that when I run an ad on Facebook, how does it need to show up so that people click your stuff and they're ready to swipe your cards? That's what I do. But there's the other challenge in the cannabis lane now, isn't it?
I was going to say, everybody in the cannabis world knows, well, I get shut down on Instagram. I get shut down on Twitter. I was talking to somebody about that today. And then, of course, Facebook, you can't even boost anything if you have anything like cannabis in your name, like Pro Cannabis Media. So we can't boost anything on Facebook. And this is how Fred and I said, Fred, how do I get around that? How did you get around it, Fred?
Well, that's the part where the toll booth comes on and they got to pay, bro. I mean, but we've done it. You've watched us do it, and I have no problem showing anybody else how to do it. But literally, the problem in the cannabis industry is the fact that we're so creative that if we just stopped for like a half second and just pretend for 1 second, maybe Fred was saying could be correct, like test out this Fred Smith stuff, you'll start seeing how I move on lane. And I got people literally making money out starting from nothing all the way out to, like I told you, I scaled the manufacturing side of this game. So I know how to turn a dollar in this game.
And so I know, so I guess the next question is, how do people find out about your secret, or how did they start working with you or learn from you? I guess that would be the big question.
Oh yeah, that's easy. If they can go to my Facebook profile right now, /this is Fred Smith, they're going to see 8fscopy.com, because it does start with learning really how to write. I mean, right here, right now, I've got my super next level stuff, because writing is so important that I am literally putting this on paper. So this is digital paper now. And right here, I just says, the magic trick is we win. Like, period. We win, period. Because when you understand it, you got to get your head and butt wired together. And the only way you can do it, because Steve Jobs already proved it. Steve Jobs, when he got kicked out of his own company, he started doing calligraphy. A lot of people don't know that. So he started having some dope stuff coming through on Mac. And that's one of the reasons why, even though Microsoft was first, Apple became the first $4 trillion company. I'm just watching certain moves. And because I've moved a certain way all my life, that enables me to connect dots on like some crazy levels. And I have fun doing it. As you know, me and you can stay, like, we can talk forever and we don't lose energy. And that's what I really focus in on. And the cannabis lane really gave me that. It's really brought me to the highest and best version of myself, literally, because once I got past certain barriers as far as all the limitations, like, you're a Black man, you've got, mental blah, blah, blah. You've got this. My dad was special education, like all of this stuff started popping up in my life that I never had to deal with before. My dad died last year on 4/20. So the FBI calls that a clue in my book. Yeah, he literally died. I got that call that no guy wants to get for their dad. And I could hear it. He was just like, and that crushed me because I didn't have a chance to really say thank you. So this is my biggest thank you, is to just say, hey, I'm launching Cannapreneur, Dad. I love you. And I've met some amazing people, man. It's just real.
So I was talking to another guy from California this week. I think it was this week. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what week it is. And one of the questions I asked that person is, how has California screwed up the cannabis industry?
Well, it depends. That's a presupposed question. I've never seen it, because I know how to move. As an advertiser, it's my job to figure out how to move. It's not my job to figure out how to not move. There's enough of that already. Why should I focus in on that? That makes no sense to me.
Right. Okay.
It just doesn't. I mean, my mind isn't even now. I am when it comes to certain things, like when I'm writing for people or if I'm launching businesses, yes, you have to have certain contingencies and rails, and I call it my clients measuring twice, cutting once. But the bottom line is, it's ready, aim, fire. And I just spend more time getting ready. I literally marshal my resources, and I make sure that when I push, I'm going to push. And there are different levels to pushing. Sometimes you got to push 100%. Sometimes you have to push 50%. So the way that my mind works is, I'm just trying to find where the resistance is to my message. And then I'm working to figure out how I navigate that. And that's what I've been able to do with Facebook. So it doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is how you're doing it.
Okay. So
that makes sense.
Wait a second. We're live streaming on Facebook right now. Okay. Uh-huh. The nice thing about live streaming is they really can't stop you from live streaming once you get access to it and know how to do it.
Right.
It's the uploaded videos that are checked out by the algorithms and the artificial intelligence out there that are looking for certain words. And when the word cannabis is in the name of your group, Pro Cannabis Media, you can't really hide behind anything else, right? So, but every time I try to boost,
they don't hide.
Every time I try to boost a post on Facebook, you can't do it. Now, Fred, you're telling me that you know how to do that. Am I right?
I'm doing it all the time. Look, this is the guy, and this is facts. Because you got to understand something. Facebook is not in the business of telling you what to do. Facebook is in the business of showing you, here's the box, here's how wide it is, here's how high it is, and here's how you can play in the box. You just simply have to read the directions. And most people don't even read the terms and conditions to understand how to move. So tell me anybody who's watching right now, when's the last time y'all watched the terms and conditions? I'll wait, because nobody do it. They give you the instructions. Like for example, when I went on Clubhouse, people were like, why aren't you on Clubhouse? I'm like, because me and Rico looked at it, and the first pass just had some language in there. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I think it's a great platform, but I'm not doing it. So now through time, I've watched their terms and conditions evolve, and now it's to a point where I'm ready to play because I know what to look for. And I'm just like, I'm very mindful about how I move because I just want to show etiquette to everybody. And that's one of the things that most people don't show online is bad etiquette. Period. So that's why the iOS 14 stuff really came into play, because Facebook is looking to move in a different direction. That's why we have Meta. They're pretty much saying, what do you want? You want that? Okay, cool. Move this way, this way, this way, and you'll have it. What do you want? You want that? Okay, great. That's what advertising is.
Right. So
that's all it is.
So I think we've talked about this. I have a beef with all social media companies. And if you want to put them under one metaverse, it can be under that. Okay. And the beef is as follows. If the product of media, and media is only a conduit of information. Now, granted, we all know sometimes that information gets slanted one way or another. That being said, for the most part, it is a conduit of information.
100%.
Now, because of social media, every time you log on, in fact, you don't even have to log on anymore. You just have to mention something, and all these ads pop up on your phone, and you say, "How did that happen?" I was just looking at that. Oh my God, how did that happen? Because data is now king, right? So, okay, hang on. This is where I'm going. Metaverse is a media company, correct? We all get that? Delivering billions of eyeballs a day or something like that, right?
Yep.
Why is it that a media company like that and a media company like, I don't know, ABC, CBS, NBC, they still have to get licenses to broadcast over the air? Right? That's what the FCC was started for. We don't want to yell fire in a crowded theater. We want to protect the airwaves. So what's the difference between Wi-Fi and over the air? That's my beef with media and social media, because I think all the social media companies need to go before the FCC to get a license to continue to operate. But of course,
it ain't gonna happen. I'm gonna tell you why. Because unfortunately, marketers have screwed up the world. So you're talking about $160 million an hour thing. It's not a company at that point in time. It's just not a company. What are we talking about?
Making money, right? It's just delivering eyeballs, delivering ideas.
At that point in time, it's a super plug, and that's just how I look at it. I'm like, look, man, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different lanes that I've ran in the cannabis game. Not everybody plays the same way. So I just honor people's space. That's what we have to do. That's why I keep talking about the half-second step back. I can't boo-boo on media and social media because I've ran in both lanes. I told you, I was professionally trained to do what you did I was trained for 6 months, 18 hours a day just to do what you're doing right now, and at a military level. And then I come back 25 years later and just learn how to do it in the retail lane. So that's why I get it. I'm like, nobody else gets it, because here's the problem, Jimmy. Everybody's butthurt about their products, but they haven't ran an ad yet to see if it even works. That's the problem. People will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars versus just testing a little bit of their dream to see if people have an appetite. There's a whole industry made around just what I'm telling you right now. And that's the one that's been on Facebook. And that's the one that just got broken. And I know these people. So what we got to understand is that when you're really able to control your own narrative, That's what social media is about. It's not media. We're not talking about radio. Those are bigger entities. So we're over here right now. That's what Meta is about. It's literally a smaller thing.
But that's interesting you say that, because I don't really, not sure I buy into that. Okay. And
it's okay. I don't want anybody to believe me. I want them to test it. I don't care. Like don't believe a word I say. Go test it, because my stuff works. I'm on record. When I say something, I don't miss too much, bro. Okay. And that's what an advertiser's supposed to do. I'm not supposed to miss. That's why Facebook booked a call with me. This is the same company last year that I almost got deplatformed off of. I was in Nashville right now, 10 days ago, deleting over 2,200 people out of my Facebook group. And I ran over 3,000 articles. I had a 92% engagement rate. I talked about everything everybody else was talking about during that time. Some people with groups of 4 million people were getting shut off, and that was verified on Reuters. Everything you talked about in 2020, I talked about. I got receipts. I still have people from the original crew there who know how to move like that, and they're all crushing it. They're either already multiple six-figure earners all the way down to getting to be some nine-figure earners right now. And most of them, they're there.
I do?
Yeah.
I know them? Yeah. Do they know me?
Now they do.
Well, because
that's how it works, man. That's how it works.
Right. Well, we both are aligned with the fact that anybody, any human person, or any company can create their own content and share it in the universe of social media. Right? You get to control your own message through social media to your followers. That exists for anybody who knows enough to set up a YouTube channel, a Facebook page, a Twitter account, Instagram handle, whatever it is. They control the narrative that goes up and out. Correct?
100%. Yep. 100%.
This is what I've been telling the cannabis industry. I hate when they say, well, we can't advertise on traditional radio and TV. First of all, those audiences are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, because everybody now is going to get their information through the internet. It's one of the reasons why Pro Cannabis Media Network exists, because we have built a cannabis-friendly network of content producers.
Yep.
This is what we've done. And it's working, people. All they know is we're live streaming, and that's the only work I care about. Because I've always said, Fred, and I do teach this to young people and other people who want to learn, that you want to control your message, because if you're going to put your foot in your mouth, you want to make sure it's your own foot in your own mouth.
100%. And seriously, that's where the rub lies. See, that's where I come in. Because as a public affairs specialist in the military, I used to work with like Hollywood all the time, like because I was at Camp Pendleton. So we would have people coming through. Like the last thing I worked on was with James Brolin, Pensacola Wings of Gold. He came directly to our unit, and I was helping him out. Hey, sir, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. So I've always had this kind of connection and visibility from day one, my whole career. Like even in the car business, that's just the way it was. Everybody knows me in the car game for fixing dealerships, and I go in there, help with buy, sales, train, desk, close, and finance. I killed everything, and it was out of love, because there's a certain way you just have to move to attract people. I don't get caught up in the thing, because Facebook might not be the thing tomorrow. What I get caught up in is how to move, how to work, how to move, how to get it done. That's it.
All right. One last thing about Facebook, because I think I'm going to say something here that may end up coming true in a not too distant future.
Okay.
Do you ever think that Facebook will start bidding for the rights to live stream NFL football games?
Do I think they'll bid for it?
Mm-hmm. They have to. You have to have the right to broadcast that entity. That is the most popular TV show. Right. Any NFL football game, 97 out of the top 100 shows last year were all NFL football games.
So my question to you is it being properly monetized?
I would say so, because they keep expanding who can get access to those games, right?
But just because it's expanding doesn't mean that it's profitable. See, that's what people don't understand about monetization. There's a whole bunch of people out there now. The NFL are some very smart people. They probably have a whole bunch of statisticians that say that they're losing a whole bunch of money. I have ran with some of the best people on the planet who have broken Vegas. Okay, I'm just letting you know, like it really is a numbers game at this point in time. So all I'm just telling you is just that when you really understand how to dial this game in, it's nothing more than numbers. I mean, even when you look at Facebook, the reasons why they're the world's largest casinos because they do $160 million an hour. They use all the techniques from the casino industry. That's like, I'm not saying anything that's like beyond what's already out there in public information. And you can go right now to Netflix and watch The Great Hack. You will watch the people who, I mean, I'm just saying it's out there. Yeah. Fred Smith didn't say it, but I can tell you one thing. At my level, I was training high-level military people to do exactly what you're seeing in the world right now. So I'm like, I get it. It's just like, why don't we all just like, you know, control our own narratives? Just, that's right. You know, I mean,
be your own channel, be your own voice, be yourself. Fred, how do people get to you? How do people find you and follow you?
Oh, shoot.
Or well, maybe you don't want to be followed.
No, I do want to be followed. So right here, you can go over to cannapreneur.com. Here's all my contact info right here. I know it's a little blurry, but you can go to
there it is. Hold it right there. Hold it right there.
Go to cannapreneur.com.
Yep.
Okay. Now the project that I'm doing, I want to see if we can raise the entire vibration of a city. So I've already started working on the superpower.life. We've got a street team on that right now. I'm getting ready for some other stuff. So these are already passing out. We are limitless. So that's what I got right there. And just quite frankly, much love and shout out to everybody who's making this possible. But if they really, really, really want to get a hold of me directly, I'm gonna give you my number and it's okay. It's at scale. The number is 310-421-0785. Text Jimmy to 310-421-0785. So we can have some conversation.
That way you'll know they got it from here. I got it. I got you, Fred Smith. We're up against it now because we got another live show to go. In fact, Pro Cannabis Media is going to be live streaming for the next 3 hours. We got the American Cannabis Report with Christopher Smith that follows our Weed Talk News at 6 o'clock. But Fred, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Great lead in to the business of cannabis.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
I'm a fan. That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or
You're missing out. Calling all growers with Liz Grow.
Well, here we are again, TGIF. Thank God it's Friday and another live edition of Green Rush Live, the business of cannabis talk show. As far as we know, the only 2-hour live Friday afternoon business of cannabis talk show in the universe. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. So happy to be here and so happy to be talking about the international scene of cannabis for the majority of this show. But at the top of the show, we always feature one interview. Usually it's a mover and a shaker. Perhaps over the last week, we've had a lot of pretty impressive people on this show, from the CEO of NJBiz, Chris Walsh comes on here all the time, to Chris Beals, the CEO of WM Technologies, which you know in the business is Reed Bass. He's been on with us as well. And now we've welcomed in not just one gentleman, but two gentlemen. Rick Thompson from Michigan is going to be my co-host today, and Edmund DeVeaux from the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association. Edmund and Rick, great to see you guys. And again, thank you for joining me here on Friday. All right, so the last time we saw Edmund was a few months ago, when New Jersey was just starting to come around to the fact that, hey, we're going to create an adult use market. What are we going to do? So Edmund, tell us, give us an update. I know the applications are in the works. I know there's plenty of news going on in New Jersey. Bring us up to date on what the scene is in business in the New Jersey cannabis.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Good to see you again. So New Jersey, we're moving slowly but surely. I like to tell people that the grass is greener and we are getting to the other side. So as you pointed out, it was back in August of 2021, the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission actually published the regulations, or its first iteration of regulations. And from that point, it's been all work on their part, trying to put together the pieces, listening to the community, listening to the public. And the New Jersey CannaBusiness Association has been right there with them, trying to help them put things together. And as you pointed out, the adult use market is here and it's here to stay. And as of December 15th, 2021, the application portal, in other words, we're not going to volumes, thousands of pages of documents being handed in, being rushed down to Trenton. It's an application portal. And that application portal opened up for 3 of the licensing categories of the 6, which includes cultivation, processing, and laboratory testing. And as of March 15th of this year, we expect the application portal to open up for retail establishments.
And how many applications might show up and how many licenses are going to be distributed?
As of last count, we had about 300, a little over 300 applications in the portal, and they are divided up amongst the cultivation and processing.
Right.
So we expect to see hundreds more. The actual portal was opened with over 600 openings, but we're at 300 or so actual applications that have been submitted.
There you go. And Rick Thompson's from Michigan, a much more mature market than New Jersey, obviously, maybe even more mature than the Massachusetts market. In fact, I think it is. Rick, when he described slow and steady, I mean, has that changed in Michigan?
Well, actually, it's better than our launch here in Michigan. We tried to encourage the Marijuana Regulatory Agency to stagger licensure like you're doing in New Jersey, to put forth first cultivation and processing facilities and then license retail afterwards. Instead, they decided to do everybody all at once, and it created a big backlog of licensing also at the MRA, as well as in an uneven and unsteady marketplace. You had retailers that were open that had very little product to put on their shelves, and it was difficult for some of them to make bills right off the bat because we had such a variance there. So kudos to New Jersey for doing it in a more intelligent way.
And actually, I think that's an advantage for all the new states that are coming into the market. They can look at what happened in Washington State and Colorado, and then look at California and Arizona and Oklahoma, and perhaps learn what not to do, right, Ed, and try and make it work for that specific state.
Jimmy, that's a great point. In fact, one of the things that we do in our communications with the community, that everybody wants it to happen, and we caution them. Look, there's no playbook. There's nothing in advance. This is being created from scratch. I know people refer to other states that are more mature than us, but every state is different. There's going to be 50 different ways, plus the District of Columbia, 51 different ways of doing this industry. And so what we're doing, Rick, thank you so much. I will definitely convey that because there's a few of us that have been, we've been saying, look, this is the way to go. We've been supportive of the CRC, much to the chagrin of those advocates that have pushed for so long, and I get it. But slow and steady wins the race.
There you go. Slow and steady wins the race. Isn't that Yertle the Turtle? And isn't that book about Mitch McConnell, I think, or something?
I think it goes back to Aesop, but you get whatever reference you want there, Jimmy.
Thank you, Rick. I knew it, Jim, but I just, every time I hear any kind of thing like that, that face comes into my brain for some reason.
Well, to be cliche, and New York likes to poke their finger in our eye every now and then, but I always tell them, first of all, we beat you to it. So the tortoise did in fact beat the hare in that instance. And again, thanks again, Rick, for pointing out that this is probably the better way to go by and large.
Right. Access to capital, Edmund, that's the biggest issue for everybody. I don't care if you're a grower, a cultivator, a testing lab, an entrepreneur. Everybody's looking to have access to capital. What's going on in New Jersey in regards to the social equity applicants, and are there any funds emerging that even they have a shot at taking advantage of?
Looking down the road at this challenge, the Regulatory Commission and the legislation are in agreement that if you are an applicant or actually if you're an investor, you can invest into up to 7 operations. Now, you can't get a majority stake, but it's allowing private capital to enter into the market. Now, we do have a couple of financial institutions that have come forward to do banking, but to your point, Jimmy, loans and grants are something in the future. It's being discussed, but allowing private capital to come in a regulated way, protecting the potential operator from venture capitalists or vulture capitalists, if you want to again be cliche, but we are in fact allowing for investment. So I'll digress just for a second, because that is one of the things that we found very challenging. We have social equity applicants. The state did a wonderful job by actually creating a definition for social equity applicant, and income was certainly one of those measures. And so we worry about the difference between somebody who likes cannabis and wants to be in business and somebody who's in business and wants to be in cannabis. So we want to make sure that we do the right things to protect new entrants into the private sector, period.
Gotcha. I gotcha. And it's interesting. Well, first of all, I got to ask about growth with the Cannabis Business Association. How many members do you have right now?
So we're looking at about 1,000 members.
Wow.
And in terms of our newsletters and our events, mostly our newsletters, we are actually touching over 2,000 people, majority in the state. I'm sure there are some people outside the state that receive our information, but we are in fact growing. We are getting larger companies to join now. In fact, and I may have mentioned it on your show, we view ourselves now as the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. We represent not only current license holders, one of whom sits on our board, but we represent future applicants and all of the ancillary businesses that are going to play in this market. So we are the Chamber of Commerce, and we're providing opportunities for all of them to get engaged in this.
Rick, you're pretty familiar with the businesses in Michigan as far as cannabis goes. I'm pretty sure you're involved with one association, aren't you? At least one, as you're an executive director of NORML. I know that in Michigan.
Right, but I'm not a member of any of the cannabis business organizations. We do have two very large cannabis business organizations here, or rather one very large numerically and one very large with reach. And one of them is a real son of a bitch, and one of them is a real compassionate, functioning, helpful organization. What are you doing in New Jersey to not develop that son of a bitch attitude that sometimes befalls cannabis business associations?
Well, if you watched yesterday's CRC meeting, one of them has crossed that son of a bitch threshold. Look, we are the first, and we are, in fact, the largest trade association in the state. Others have cropped up along the way, and I'm separating them from the advocacy organizations like NORML, like UMCR, like Minorities for Marijuana. So in terms of the business structure, there's only maybe 2 of us, but we represent the entire industry. The other one represents just the current license holders, of which there's 12. Mm-hmm. There's 12 that are being bought over from the old medical marijuana program. Now, we did in fact issue licenses based on 2018 and 2019 rounds that were held up in court, but they're months away from operating. So we may in fact see what you experienced, Rick, where you're going to see 2018, 2019 kind of running in and converging with the people that are in the portal today. But by and large, you've got us, and then you've got the Cannabis Trade Association, which just represents the license holders. And then you have a couple of others that are out there.
And there's normally specialty trade associations too, a producer or a processors trade association, a testing laboratory group, because there are special individual reasons why those particular industries would want to lobby on a unique basis as opposed to having just a generalized lobby effort. So I can see where any market, especially in a state as large as Jersey, would have multiple interests that would be reflected by business associations.
Now, it's interesting, to your point, Rick, and I may have missed the nuance there. The fact is, yes, the National Laboratory Association is present in New Jersey. And in fact, the CannaBusiness Association does in fact have a laboratory working group. We are working with a group of 7 or 8 labs that have come to us to say, look, we've got a message. Can you help us develop that message? We absolutely have recommendations for regulation. So yes, we are helping them.
So important when you go to talk to legislators that you have the actual people in the specific industry whose rules are being potentially changed by legislation, having those particular areas of specialty. In our experience, it really has worked out for those particular industries to be able to communicate with the lawmakers, not just on a statewide level, but also in some of the larger municipalities too, because oftentimes they develop rules which are contradictory to state rules and oftentimes don't make a lot of sense. I don't know if you've experienced that in New Jersey or not.
Well, it's interesting. We're getting there. Again, just going back to yesterday's CRC meeting, I did in fact receive some emails from the lab group that we're working with, and they have other recommendations, and we're going to move those recommendations forward. So it's a work in progress, to your point. Thank you.
Right. I do want to bring up an event that's happening, I think it's next week, because I just signed up for it. Our friends at ArcView in New York are running a webinar for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And I want to give a plug out there because to me, this is what I'd like to see more of in this industry. You know, everybody's looking to make money, right? I mean, that's the object of the business game. Okay. Sometimes I lose track of that, but that's true. Okay. Now, and it's a money grab. Everybody wants to make it fast, get in, get out, make your killing, go retire, whatever you need to do. But again, that money pool, for the most part, is still being controlled by the white private equity person. We're starting to see some athletes create funds for social equity applicants. Now you've got ArcView, one of the largest funders in the world and in cannabis, is now at least doing some open webinars to share some of the education that they can with that group. This is what I want to see as socially responsible capitalism in place in cannabis. Is that what's going on in that world in New Jersey? And I'm sure you're familiar with the Minorities Cannabis Business Association too, Ed.
Yes. So thank you, Jimmy. The thought is this, and I shared with you somewhat jokingly as we were planning for today. There's the one thing that keeps me up at night. And the one thing that does keep me up at night with respect to the industry is the fact that when we issued the regulations and when we passed the legalization legislation, I believe many minorities heard, if you're a minority, a woman, or a disabled veteran, you're going to get a license. And I believe that that's what people heard. And what we try to do is balance that notion of wanting success and tempering it so that you don't get disappointed, that you stay involved, that you in fact seek financial resources and not bankrupt yourself chasing a dream. So with that, we are engaged with a number of social organizations at the grassroots level, like the NAACP, like the Camden Business District or Business Association, the statewide Hispanic Chamber. And so we are reaching out to all of those individuals who probably need to develop business acumen. So that's the position that we're taking. And so we're addressing it. The legislation addresses it by mandating more or less certification points. Go to school, get certified, keep up with your education in this industry. So we have been addressing it. We want to continue to address it because it really is an issue that could really hurt the industry.
There's a question in the chat room from Miggy, who's one of our regular watchers and listeners, and he also takes part in the cannabis legalization news show that Thomas Howard produces out of Illinois every week. And Thomas is one of our correspondents for We Talk News. I can say I know that he called in a report yesterday because I listened to it. That being said, a question from the chat room is about the gray market. Now, first of all, that term itself is indefinable, undefined. You can't really define it, but you tell me what you think is the gray market in New Jersey. And Rick, that means you're going to get a chance to tell me what the gray market is in Michigan.
Rick, do you want to go first?
Well, I was the gray market in Michigan for a number of years. We had a chain of 5 illegal dispensaries in the state between 2009 and 2012. So when you talk about the black market, then the gray market, and then the regulated market, I think what you're talking about are facilities that look and feel and try to behave as much as possible like a regulated marketplace. For example, at Big Daddy's, our chain, we checked medical cards. We never sold to anyone that wasn't a registered patient. We never sold to anyone that was a minor. We were very careful about making sure there wasn't diversion of product. So there were a lot of ways in which the industry in Michigan, in the unregulated methodology, was still just as responsible as the regulated system today. And to be honest, we had 500 sites in the state of Michigan prior to 2016 when the medical marijuana laws, the business laws, came into effect. So it was quite a big thing here in the state. I think that's basically the difference between what we'd call the completely black market, the legacy market versus the gray market, trying to act as in a way that looks like a regulated function.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I'm in total agreement with what you've shared. Legacy, all right, that is now the term.
It is.
Right.
Schooled, much like just a few years ago, stop calling it marijuana, it's cannabis. I'm like, okay. And then some people came to me and said, no, control the word, it's marijuana. Okay, I get it. So it is a legacy market, and our legislation is in fact, and the regulations are providing a way to come under the regulatory umbrella. So that's the push. It's not only expungement of records, but if you haven't had your records expunged, it's an opportunity. If you've just got a simple possession charge, we want you to come under the regulatory umbrella. Much to your point, Rick, there are those folks that are out there and they're pushing the limits. They're opening up consumption lounges. They're selling product because they're saying it's legal. Yeah. They're allowing people to consume product in the shop because you can't get arrested. And so I look at those, and my concern is this: Some have a very professional downtown look and feel, and others have cropped up with big cannabis leaves painted on them, neon green. And I even heard one place has armed guards. Don't know how they got them, but that is the kind of thing that I want us to watch. I want us to be careful of. And look, if you're listening, please come under the regulated umbrella. Then this way we can avoid issues about carding people when they do come into a facility. We can handle issues like designs on buildings, what's appropriate for a downtown. Come under the umbrella. We want you there. But I get it. There's a lot of pride in legacy markets. You know, everyone knows the weed man, right? And you say weed man nationally. Ed Forshon in Trenton has been a legacy marketeer for decades and continues to do so. I don't think there's anybody that wants to tackle that issue. But Ed, come under the regulated umbrella. It's there, and I think he really is considering it, and that is the fix.
There you go.
I'd like to revisit something that was talked about just a moment or two ago about educating people and requiring certain amount of education prior to allowing them to get into the cannabis industry. Logically, this makes sense, but time is our enemy. And what I mean by that is every day that someone is studying to learn about cannabis and to be qualified for a cannabis business license, somebody else snatches one up. And sooner or later, all of the good licenses and the opportunities are gone. And when the legacy market people come into this opportunity after they've passed all these hurdles, there may not be a realistic opportunity for them to realize that American dream. So I completely understand why we want to try and make sure people that are given the opportunity to have a business can do it successfully. But I'm also concerned about making people wait to find their fortune, if that makes sense.
Right. So Rick, to that point, I don't think it's a wait, but it certainly is a requirement either upon licensing or after a certain time after you are licensed, that you do get some form of certification, whether you're touching the plant. Well, I believe it's all about touching the plant. If you're doing transportation or home delivery, have a clean driving record. But for other operations, aspects of operations, it can come later.
Gotcha. Hey, Edmund DeVeaux, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, sir. I also got to give you a compliment because I watched the interview you did with Senator, is it Nicholas Scuderi? Did I do that
Scutari,
right?
Yes, Nick Scutari.
Whatever it was. You know what? Scuderi is probably a football player. My brain is still in sports. Anyway, you did a really nice job. And the one thing that I did take out of that interview was a soundbite about home grow, which is not allowed according to these regulations at this time in New Jersey, but he definitely left the window open for future changes. That's got to be encouraging to you.
Absolutely. It's again, one of those questions that we get, where do you fall on that issue? And ultimately, look, whether we support it or not, it's going to be a function of the legislature and it's going to be a function of the CRC. When somebody puts that bill in, introduces the bill, we'll be right there with the medical community supporting medical home grow.
Right. And you know what? Those are the people that need it the most as a medicine, not the adult use recreational fun group, if you will. Not that I'm dissing them at all. We get it. Okay. But this is still a plant medicine. And that alone has got us to this point. So I never want people to forget that is still in the works, if you will. Edmund DeVeaux, New Jersey Cannabis Business Association. Thank you again for coming on. You're turning into a regular. You're welcome anytime. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Rick. Always good to see you.
Good to see you.
And now we're much too late for 420 break, but I know you still want to hear the song by Shanty, by Jonathan Edwards, don't you? I know I do. And we'll be back after that in just a moment.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just you know, like every other night, just gonna lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's
I'm a fan. That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free. If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
All right. Welcome back to Green Rush Live, our regular Friday afternoon discussion about the business of cannabis, not only here in the United States now, but we're going to expand our borders. We're going to talk about the international game and what's happening around the world. And who better to talk to about that than our European correspondent on Weed Talk News. His name is Stephen Arthur George. He's with Kai Advisors. He's from, well, let him tell him. What state are you from originally, Steve?
I'm originally from Michigan.
There you go. But you live where now?
But I now live in Lisbon, Portugal.
And is it so? Hey, Rick, is that a step up?
Well, it depends on what part of Lisbon, right?
There you go. Fair enough.
And Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit. Obviously, I'm a little familiar with what's going on in Europe, but we've seen movement towards legalization or medical programs slowly happening in different countries on the peninsula and in the continent, I guess is what they say now, right?
Correct. No, and that's exactly what's going on. It's been quite exciting the last few years, with Germany really kicking it off and getting more exciting back in 2017, and now well over a couple 100,000 patients in Germany, and kind of leading the charge here in Europe, if you will. Also now the new government that just got elected at the end of last year discussing adult use regulations as well. So, we're seeing a lot of momentum, and I think actually this year, 2022, is going to be quite exciting for the cannabis space in general in Europe.
Rick, do you want to throw a first question at him? I have a few, but I'd like to give you the opportunity since you're both, you're native, you're both from the hood.
Well, yeah, so we're almost blood brothers, right? Yeah, but me and Eminem also, because he's from Michigan as well. But being from Portugal, Latin America is one of the hottest markets nowadays, or at least it has the potential to be one of the hottest markets. And Brazil, of course, most populous nation down there. So, do you have an advantage being Portuguese, working with Brazilian natives, or with other nations in that region?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually one of the highlights of being here in Portugal, because Portugal it's one of the smaller countries in Europe, right? Only about 10 million population, but which is similar to our home state of Michigan. So gives you kind of an understanding of what the size of the country looks like, right? But Portuguese speak Portuguese, and Brazil was an old, Portuguese territory, right? So Brazilians also speak Portuguese. The languages are a bit different. They've got their own slangs and their own words that they use, but they both speak Portuguese. So it's a huge advantage here being in Portugal, the only Portuguese-speaking European country, to also connect with Brazilians in Brazil.
So they're exporting Canadian cannabis, I know they are, to Europe, correct?
Correct.
And it's Germany and Israel are the two biggest importers of that from Canada?
Correct. Yeah, we'll see. I haven't seen the full numbers for last year, but I think when we were tracking into the third quarter, it was looking like Germany was going to import close to 15, maybe 20 tons in 2021. But Israel's already well ahead of that, and I think imported well over 10 tons last year into the country. So both Germany and Israel being the big importers so far, and this is pure medical as well, right? There's no adult use regulation in either of these countries, so all of this cannabis is then going through the healthcare system and being prescribed to patients both in Israel and in Germany.
Right, and that's something you explained to me about the Portuguese laws, that you have to actually talk to a MD to get a prescription for cannabis, correct?
Correct. It's like, it's that similar, and I don't know how every state works, but, I was still living in Michigan back in 2008 when we passed the state regulations. So, which, and I believe in Rick, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but, a card system, right? That's good for a year that then you would renew annually. And that card would allow you to, at that point, carry, I believe, 2.5 ounces. You could grow 12 plants at home, a couple other things along with that. But here in Europe, what we're seeing is more, per prescription per unit, similar to what you would see with any other prescription medication that you would get from your physician, right? Where it's going to take a physical prescription that you then go exchange for a medicine, right? So that's what we're seeing across all European countries so far, including Germany, UK, Portugal, any of them that have opened up with regulation. I think we're up to about 13 countries now, if I'm correct, in Europe, that have some type of regulation in place, but it all comes with a per unit prescription, let's say.
Yeah.
In the Canadian system, when they had I'm sorry, Jimmy. In
the
Canadian system, when they had a medical program, they used to homogenize the cannabis prior to dispensing it to medical patients. Homogenizing means just chopping it all up into essentially ground up cannabis instead of having actual cannabis buds. How is it dispensed? Are you familiar with that? Is it homogenized first before it's weighed out and sent away?
It depends. In most places, you are able to get like a whole flower. It's interesting. And in Germany, it even gets a bit more complicated because it has to be compounded actually. But this area of compounding gets a little bit interesting depending on who you're dealing with, right? So it doesn't, and oftentimes a compound, you'd think something actually has to be formulated or transformed in some sense. But oftentimes this is, there's different ways of compounding, right? It might just be like taking a bulk package and then putting it into smaller packages, right? Could be considered compounding in the pharmacy. I even think some just relabeling is considered compounding. So, you're getting whole flower, right? You can get whole flower. I think, there's milled or grinded options that are available, but whole flower is readily available.
Yeah. And by the way, Captain Hooter is now in Portugal. And I know that he was able to find somebody, and some of the people then that watch this show know who Captain Hooter is. He wrote the definitive guide to the coffee houses in Amsterdam. And we met him in Jamaica a few years back. And then he was in Jamaica. And then he went from Jamaica to Portugal. And one of his biggest concerns was, where am I going to get my weed once I get there? Because I don't know anybody. He managed to find his way through. I want to throw this out there because you kind of set the scene of what's going on as far as medical legislation versus adult use legislation. But when you introduce it as a medical product, it pretty much decriminalizes the substance so that law enforcement isn't going to hassle you as for individual use if it happens to be on your possession. And to me, that's a huge step, because one of the first things that people why they didn't want to try it was it's illegal. That was always it's illegal. I don't want to mess with that. Well, now law enforcement in this country, Rick, you can attest to this too. They don't want to prosecute people for cannabis crimes. So I just wonder, is this what we're seeing, in the trenches, if you will, in different countries that have decriminalized it and have even a little medical program?
For sure. I think we're still quite a bit behind, actually, where the US is at. I think we've made some more progress back home with just, the amount of states that have now adult use and with dispensaries on public streets. And, so it's more in your face. So I think people are getting used to it more. Where here, there's both sides, right? I think it's going to take some more time, but from the medical standpoint, when I was working as country manager of Portugal with Tilray, I was working directly with a lot of the healthcare community here in Portugal, right? And working with key opinion leaders within the healthcare community, that were getting on board and wanting to be educated and learn more about cannabis medicine. And a lot of times these were physicians who this was the first time you were bringing this to their table, right? So it wasn't not even advocates, prior advocates. These are new physicians, but that, recognize this potential and realize that the national health system is allowing for products and allowing them to be registered, which means they also are confident that the quality is there as well, right? And that they're not putting their patients in possible jeopardy because of a product's quality standard.
And they are growing it in Portugal.
Correct.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So back in the day, a few years back in Massachusetts, when the ballot question was initiated, 2016 is when the ballot for adult use passed in Massachusetts. And I have a dear friend, I'm just going to refer to him as LP, and he voted against adult use because he already had a medical card. And his reasoning, of course, was, I'm already in the club. I don't want anybody else in there. I understood that, but we did have some back and forth on this issue because I wanted to see it become normalized and studied and researched. And, they seem to be slowly moving in that direction as well. I think it's interesting. Portugal has socialized medicine. Am I right?
Correct.
Canada has socialized medicine, correct? Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Right. And I can't talk to when I talk to my doctor about my profession and what I do, it is I try to explain to him we're a media company, but we're in the cannabis space. He doesn't want anything to, I can't talk to you about that. And I said, actually, doc, you can, because I'm not going to tell anybody. Okay. That being said, you should study it, because if you really believe in helping people, this product can help a lot of people medicinally. And I find it interesting that two socialized nations have their medical communities have brought it in, have to study it, because they are getting patients that are looking to get some relief for a condition that cannabis can certainly improve. And how many other nations, and you may not know this, Stephen, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Do you know how many other nations in the European continent have socialized medicine? Are they all socialized?
I believe they all have a national healthcare system. Yes. And even more on top of that, what's even more fascinating is that in Germany, depending on, so in Germany, you have medical cannabis, right? And you can get a prescription from your doctor. There's also the ability, though, to be reimbursed. Okay. This does take some additional paperwork that would not be needed for maybe other medicines. So it's still, they make it a little bit more difficult, if you will, especially for physicians, because they often don't like to fill out if they could prescribe one thing and not have to fill out the paperwork. But if they prescribe medical cannabis, they do have to fill out the paperwork. It's the same indication that they're trying to treat. So, that's a little bit of a hurdle for the physicians, because it's just you're asking them to do extra work. But when these are being submitted for reimbursement, they are fully reimbursed. Okay. This means patients are getting 15-gram bags of whole flower dried cannabis for €5, or, a simple copay. Right. So for me, this is the most, this is like top legitimization of medical cannabis, right? Where the government is actually going into their pocket to put this medicine and allow patients to consume this medicine, right? For different indications, and also, showing some paperwork as well. So it's like, these are more or less, these are usually more serious indications as well, right? So it just shows the power of this plant that I know all three of us here sitting have known for quite some time.
Yeah. Rick Thompson, what's your feeling about, obviously, there are people in politics in the United States of America who believe we have a national healthcare system. It's all controlled by the lobbyists and the almighty dollar. Let's be serious here. As far as I know, there are no health companies in the United States reimbursing for medical. Am I correct? Or do you know of any at all?
Well, I do know that for some of the tertiary things that come along with medical marijuana, some of the doctor's visits where there's not a prescription being handed out for cannabis, some of those are being reimbursed, but that's just under a generalized thing. I'd like to point out too, though, that the United States did issue cannabis to, I think, 6 different patients for decades. They were part of an original project in the 70s. Irv Rosenfeld's one of them. And
that's right.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So they did do that. Socialized medicine or no, our United States government certainly showed that they felt the value of it, and they continued that program right up until the death of some of the participants. I believe Irv's the last one left. So you're looking at a system where, the contradictions in the drug war are just so deep and so telling. It's almost impossible to follow them.
Yeah, I did know of a company actually in Florida called Novus that supposedly did cover medicinal cannabis programs. And of course, in Florida, the dominant dispensary down there is True Leaf. There are no medical dispensaries though, as like we see here in the U.S., in Europe, in any country. Am I right? It's all through the medical doctors and the socialized medicine programs in Europe, right?
Correct. At the, from like the legal standpoint, right? And what's even on top of that is that all the pharmacy has become the distributor, right? And because what's interesting too in Europe, if you've been over here, they don't have the CVS and the Rite Aid type of pharmacy where it's a pharmacy and a convenience store. It's like it's just a pharmacy. Now, some of them are larger and they do sell other goods in there, right? But it all goes back to wellness. I don't think you'll find any food or drinks in a pharmacy in Europe. Maybe some, but not that I've seen. So that's the one thing is, you have that pharmacy distribution model, but Europe's an interesting place, right? Because then you also, we all know about Amsterdam, right? And although that's not, it wasn't ever a medical scheme, Amsterdam has had these coffee shops forever. But there's, but when you look into this, and now Amsterdam's trying their own little recreational adult use program. But when you look into these coffee shops, you find out that like, it's not really like legal. Like the coffee shop inside the consumption is legal, but actually like someone growing it and supplying the coffee shop, there's no like supply chain legality around that, right? So it's interesting. And then you have the same thing in Spain, right? And mostly concentrated in Catalonia, which is where Barcelona is. But mostly concentrated there, but you have some in Madrid, you have some in the south of Spain as well. But these are the clubs, right? And this is also an interesting thing, that I've gotten into arguments with a lot of people about this because it's, let's say it's legal and it's I still stick, it's not legal, like show me a Spanish law that says this is legal. It's not there, and it's basically, from my understanding, it's based off this foundation of the two constitutional rights in Spain that you can do anything that you want behind your own closed door. And we have the right to associate. So, Jimmy, you start growing cannabis behind your door. It's not bothering anyone. I come stop by to see you, Jimmy. See, Jimmy, you're growing some plants here. Can you grow some plants for me? It's kind of like the caregiver thing, just like, but the caregiver thing has a framework. There is no framework. This is just constitutional rights that then they're legally building a framework around to defend themselves. And that's why many of these still operate today. But when we look at the when we look at medical cannabis industry here and working with the national health regulators, it's pharmacy distribution.
Cannabis is one of the largest conferences in Europe.
Coming up in March.
That's right. It's huge. And for a country that hasn't actually officially written it out that they're okay with it yet, that's actually kind of a bold move. So Cannabis, is that pushing barriers in the European Union?
It is, but the Catalonian government, Spain's a regional government, right? So you have the central government, but it has its region, and the Catalonian government has always been a little bit standalone, if you will, right? And if you can even remember a few years back, they were trying to kind of defect from Spain, like California was, back a few years ago as well, trying to build their own country, right? So Catalonia was trying to do the same thing. So I think the Catalonian government, they turn their eye, right? And they really just don't have an issue with it. So they kind of allow this to continue at the regional level.
And everything's still flower on the medicinal side. Is that right?
No, you can get some more in Germany. They've got some oils, got some oils and some, there's also no edibles yet. You're seeing some tablets, some sublingual tablets, you're seeing more pure medical formulations, right? That's what it looks like. besides the dried flower. And actually the dried flower has been one of the hardest things to get a high quality product onto the market due to the pharmaceutical regulations, right? And the EU, the European Pharmacopoeia standards, which, it's from a registration standpoint, it's very difficult when dealing with an agricultural product that has fluctuation, right? To then hit those cannabinoid marks every single time on the dot and make sure they fit the registration and stuff like this. So the dried flower is a bit more difficult, and that's why you're actually seeing a lot of growth in Germany of the oils and tinctures, right? And you actually find also that the physicians tend to prefer to work with a tincture or an oil or a sublingual tablet or something, because they want to stay away from the inhalation, right? But you see that a lot of physicians, though, they understand, and I worked with a physician here in Portugal for a long time, and a pain physician, right, that deals with a lot of chronic and acute pain as well. And, when it comes to a fast acting solution, starting to explain to her, that 5 to 10 seconds reaction, I mean, they don't really have a tool like that. So it's quite fascinating, and I think that was one of the things that started opening some eyes to the inhalation option of dried flower. And in Portugal right now, that is the only product on the market. While working with Tilray is one of the things that I go down and will always be humbled by, but getting, kind of working with the team and leading the team to get the first product, dried flower product approved here in Portugal. That's now available for prescription. So outside of that, it's still only Sativex from the GW Pharmacy Group. But, now there's a dried flower available here in Portugal, and it's being prescribed, and patients are using it, and physicians are learning about it, and they're learning about vaporizers, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. Most of the doctors that I talked to over the last 2 years, and I want to say, I don't know, dozens anyway, vaping dried flower seems to be the safest way to titrate, to inhale, and that's what's out there as far as literature and any kind of studies. It's interesting. Miggy in the chat room says, in Thailand hospitals, they're giving edibles to medical patients, which, I don't know if you've ever had Thai stick. It's pretty cool. So I don't know how they're making their edibles, but it's available in the hospital if you have the right thing. Hey, we're gonna wrap this half hour up. Stephen, it was great just talking about this with you. I mean, we're so lucky to have somebody, first of all, that's from Michigan in Europe that can talk the talk. Okay, I think I said that to you a long time ago, and I love that. And you're doing a great job with your European reports, and we really appreciate the efforts you're putting in here. Rick, you got anything left for your old Michigan native here?
No, enjoy Europe, and it's cold as hell here, so don't rush back.
No, I try to stay away in the winter, Rick, and just come back for the nice summer. So I try to take the best of both worlds, if you will. But no, I appreciate the time, guys, and I also think you got some great guests coming on the show later. I think if I'm sure there's another Portugal gentleman that'll be on the show who's a wealth of knowledge as well. So appreciate you guys and what you do.
Appreciate it, Stephen. I think we've had a COVID bug on some of our guests today, so I'm not quite sure who's showing up and who's not, but you did show up, and that's what I love. And thank you very much. We're going to take our top of the hour break now. We'll be back on the other side with more international cannabis talk. Don't go away.
I'm a fan. That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network Pro Cannabis Media, and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free. If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
Hey, welcome back to Green Rush Live, the internet. Things, and I'm certainly hanging in here, but usually I'm out there in the weeds world. That's my podcast. That's my one-on-one show. I've now replaced myself on We Talk News with Elena Pinto, and a reminder, that new show comes up at the end of the this program. Will be streaming right up until 6 o'clock. Our chat room is open, and Rick Thompson is alongside from Michigan, and he's also one of our correspondents from that great state. And Rick, you having fun? This is a little different than Jazz Cabbage Cafe, isn't it?
It is, because I'm not smoking during this program, so
Yeah,
that makes a lot different, actually. So
it's fun. We appreciate that. That's something we have talked about both internally and externally, and I don't have a problem with any of my guests if they'd like to. I'll never forget the first one though. Jared Mirsky was the first person to actually take a bong hit live on one of our shows, and you know what? It was natural, so it was fun. That being said, let me introduce Chris Day, Josh Hardin, and Nathan Mison. All three actually have been on with us in the past, and I want to welcome them back to the show. Thank you, all three of you, for coming back. I'd like to start with Chris Day a little bit. He's the co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective and Project Evolve. Chris, welcome back. What's the most pressing issue that you're finding in your talks on the international scene right now?
I think this year internationally for us, our eyes are very much on Europe. The recent shifts in Malta were like a precursor of what I think we're going to see in Germany. And if Germany goes the direction we think it will on adult use, that certainly will change the landscape in Europe, but it'll also just continue to add increasing pressure on the US to get its act together and quit playing around. So I am enthusiastic about Europe this year. I'm going to be at least over there for at least 3 months in the middle part of the year in different markets, provided, we all can travel, which seems to be loosening up.
And no conflicts between, perhaps Eastern powers, but other than that, they were good.
Yeah, let's just hope that is saber rattling.
And that's Nathan Mison from Diplomat Consulting. He's up in Canada, in Alberta. Am I right, Nathan?
You are, yes, sir.
And you were involved with the whole Canadian rollout of the legalization. And we just had Stephen Arthur George on. He's our European correspondent for our We Talk News show. And he kind of gave us a great picture of what's going on in Europe as far as the medical programs. And because a lot of those countries have socialized medicine, Canada also has socialized medicine. It is the medical community that's dispersing the cannabis medicine, right?
Yes.
And of course, the next step from that is adult use. And it does look like Germany's going to move on that direction at some point. But is it easier or harder in those countries to move it off what would be controlled by the government versus controlled by businesses, correct?
Well, I think it's a little column A, a little column B. So, the interesting thing is in certain jurisdictions like Germany, that you're going to have guaranteed sales through their socialized drug plan for patients that have been prescribed cannabis. Like that's a significant benefit, of which they're paying between, $16 and $24 USD a gram. That's why everybody is chasing cannabis in Germany. It's really interesting in the fact that there is some significant benefits for medicinal first and then adult use recreation. One of the big things which to flag, and I think we've had this conversation before, and I know Chris and I have definitely had it before, is it puts America at a significant disadvantage in the fact that you're going to have pharmaceutical grade requirements of cannabis cultivation because it has to adhere to pharmaceutical standards because it is a medicine first that then pivots to an adult use recreation. So the jurisdictions who are moving in that direction, the benefit is there's commonalities of that. So it creates the opportunity to have interstate trade based around a medicinal system, which by the way is not a violation of the Controlled Substance Treaty that all pharmaceutical drugs are on. But it will be tougher for the states who, of course, most jurisdictions have created adult use recreation or medicinal without EU GMP or GPP standards. So it's going to be an interesting balance between the two. I think the one thing to flag is, and I think this is an interesting thing for all of us to keep in mind, is when you see adult use come after medicinal, you see the medicinal conversation hit a denouement and then fall off. Because all of a sudden you have retail stores everywhere where it's easy to go into. So you see the marketplace, and the States has been a great example of that, right? Colorado, Oregon, where, you see adult use recreation at 85-90% of the marketplace, and medicinal be 5 to 10%. So it's an interesting circumstance and it comes with the legalization process. And I think that's a good thing for all of us to keep in mind when we're looking for investment, regulatory, economic opportunity for all of us to keep in mind.
And lastly, the third gentleman in the room this afternoon is Josh Hardin. He is the operations manager from Southern Grown LLC, and he spends his time in Arkansas. And if I remember correctly, Josh, some time in Colombia too. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's my day job, I guess. And I do work in the States some, but I've just been sucked into, and I think it's a great segue from what I think it was Nathan, I think said.
He faded away in Wi-Fi world.
Pharmaceutical.
Oh, there it is. You're back now. You're fading in and out because I know
Sorry.
you're in your office, which is your mobile office, right? That's your car.
Yeah, and I've got my hotspot. I've got a pretty good Wi-Fi, but sometimes
it goes with the wind. Wi-Fi goes with the wind. I have a direct connect, and sometimes I lose the internet. Nathan mentioned something about the cost.
I work. But so, you know, my work is in getting growers certified with the medicinal product, you know, and the Control Union, who you may or may not be aware of. Control Union really is probably one of the only companies, I think, that's really in line with GMP and with GACP, and it's one of the few standards we can get audited in Colombia. And so for Colombia, we face a lot of other challenges in getting auditors and getting safe, you know, haven for product to move into legal markets. You know, it's a really challenging position from Colombia. So I've kind of fought through that, and I see the gold, but it's never easy to get that certificate and to have a product that is in fact pharmaceutical, that's not just high quality, but that actually meets all of the documents that are required.
Amazing. And if I remember correctly, and I heard Nathan say this, it was a couple of dollars a gram, maybe $12 a gram in Europe. And I remember you saying that in Colombia, is it a nickel a gram? Did I hear that right? Do I remember that?
Well, and so the goal has been 2 cents a gram. That's what some of the bigger companies, Clover Leaves and some of the larger producers, and they're the only growers that are Control Union certified. So, but the problem has been quality at 2 cents a gram is still not there, right? Like, and initial investments, when you're having to spend millions of dollars and moving mountains literally in some of our projects, just trying to create good grow areas, your first gram is worth a couple $1,000,000. So, you know, it's easy to say 2 to 5 cents a gram. Yeah, once the markets are moving and once, you know, product can be sold readily, but we still haven't reached that point yet. So it's all kind of this dream, which, hey, you know, the cartels have done it for that price. And I've operated in some of those areas not far, and I've seen the way those grows are operated. They're really high tech. They're super efficient. They run better than most farms I've seen anywhere in the world. And because they're funded well, obviously. But it's also just the zone where you're at. The microclimates in South America can really make great quality cannabis, but it's how do you turn that, how do you market that that's not illegally, you know, and how do you move through the government and those things. That's been more of the headache in Colombia. It's not that everybody understands it and grows it, and, you know, grandmothers and grandfathers have been growing it for a long time. So that's not the new part. It's how do we make it a green thing and not a black or a gray, you know, thing. So.
Can I add just one quick point on that? Because I think Josh raises a really interesting point that I think is really important to keep in mind, is not all jurisdictions are treated equal by importing nations. Protectionism is a whole heck of a thing. Canada, unfortunately at this time, has a protectionist environment if you look about it. Colombia, in fact, and Jamaica have recently flagged cannabis protectionism as something at the WTO, that they could be in violation of their international trade obligations. And Germany would much rather take cannabis from Canada, even though it's at a higher price than Colombia. So that certification that Josh talked about with Controlled Union is going to be a really interesting thing, because once we get the standard of that we all are like, okay, that's the standard that cannabis can flow around the world, that will facilitate trade and specialization in a way that we don't have in the market yet, and hopefully allow trade obligations to kick down some of that protectionist walls that have been built around domestic markets as well.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, when I hear
agree,
about, I just want to make this point. When I hear about the exporting of cannabis around the world to different countries, it boggles my mind. Okay, it really does, because as you know, here we are in the U.S. and they are trying to maintain each state as a separate entity market for this. And I guess my question to the group, and of course this is probably a stupid question, Rick, you can tell me if it's a stupid question. It's okay. Okay. With the excess cannabis that might be growing in Massachusetts, it's against the law to have interstate commerce. But is there any way to export excess cannabis out of the country, or is that breaking a federal law too? Rick, I bet it is, right?
Breaking multiple federal laws, yes,
Yeah.
but it's the goal I think everybody expects the United States to aspire to, right? Certainly, the U.S. is falling behind other nations in the international cannabis trade. We're allowing the European Union and our Canadian and Mexican neighbors to get an advantage on us. And it's really because of hesitancy based on political things, not necessarily on economic or on medical issues. So really what we're seeing is the United States once again shooting itself in the foot when it comes to having an opportunity to be a global leader. My other concern is that once all these other nations are firmly established and the US comes into the market, how aggressively are American companies going to try and unseat some of those successful European companies that have already mastered the field? You know, that's a concern for me.
You know, Rick, it's an interesting point. I am finding, well, as a good example, I had a conversation last week with a company based in Australia, works heavily in Europe, has great distribution agreements. They've got huge production facilities, distribute medicinal products throughout the EU. And they are aware that the US, of course, has this struggle. And we've been talking about the fact that while products can't travel, brands can. Right. So the smart US companies that want to get into the space need to start creating partnerships now that allow them to at least exist, because you're right. There's two ways to do it. One is the easy way now, get in early, create a partnership, allow your brand to get some recognition, or come in eventually someday with a slash and burn mentality. And those competitors are going to be very well seated in deep, deep bureaucracies. And the American companies are not going to win that battle easily.
And the third way, just can I flag one other third way? Buy a CBD company. We're seeing lots of people buy CBD companies in markets because that's allowed under the Farm Act. So
Sure.
that is one of the ways that Americans and Canadians are buying access into international markets.
You're right. Still requires partnerships, though. I mean,
It does.
You've got to be willing to play well with others, and
That's
the US
true.
has not done that well at all.
I will say that Cookies this last month, I believe, announced that they are opening a store in Spain. So we are seeing that international jumping of brand identity, whether it's from a product line or whether it's from a retail store. There are some people out there that get it, Chris, but your point is so well taken.
Yeah. And I just want to point out to people that maybe aren't following this, you can actually create the product under a license. You could share it and like a white label, if you will, but you're licensing other people to create the same strain in their location.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can see examples of this kind of travel in the US too, right? Like technically Wana brands, right? A really familiar brand here in Colorado, has gummies distributed all over the place. They can't ship THC gummies across state lines. Right. So they have to create a network that ensures the same quality, the same product, but where most of us would think of streamlining manufacturing somewhere, cannabis has to create these multiple opportunities through partnerships in other markets. So hopefully US players, multi-state operators, and others will start to engage more. We're so siloed, though, and politically divided that it's kind of hard to get their attention sometimes.
And I think Wana is a great example of Canadian companies buying into American opportunities. Yes. Wana was recently acquired by Canopy once federal legalization. We saw Tilray buy Sweetwater breweries for hundreds of millions of dollars. We've seen High Tide purchase a whole bunch of opportunities in the States, including multiple labs in Colorado and production facilities. So the interesting thing is you're actually having what usually happens because of American exceptionalism on capital and valuations. They usually buy without, but because they've been locked out of the international market, you actually have companies buying within America, which is an interesting, different circumstance in the developing cannabis environment. Which is unusual in how it happens. Canadian companies don't normally buy American companies. That's a little bit of an aberration. So it's interesting to see.
So, and I don't care either way, but it's kind of fun. I'm in the international markets all the time, and I think the best companies should win. But for those people who get really hung up on this notion of American exceptionalism, by dragging our feet, by having these political debates, we're actually selling our companies away. So, it's a thought. There's no real defense for it except for legalization and willingness to play on the global stage.
Well, the stock market has a huge factor in that too, because the American Stock Exchange simply won't allow cannabis stocks to be traded. So many of the REITs and some of the larger financing deals are reported in Canadian dollars because they're financed, north of the border, as we like to call our Canadian friends. And the fact of the matter is that's a huge wealth transfer away from American companies into Canadian financiers. So not only are they exceeding the American marketplace in their international participation, but also in the finance industry too. I think
so. The Canadian Stock Exchange, where a lot of those companies are listed, is colloquially called the Cannabis Stock Exchange because it has become such a hub for businesses that want to raise money, and it's one of the easiest exchange for for cannabis companies to list. And it has done very well for a lot of American companies, and it's done a lot of well for an American or Canadian exchange to really differentiate itself.
I want to get Josh back into the conversation here, and I'm going to bring up the genetics world. Okay, that crazy seed world that I'm starting to. I don't understand it, but I get the fact that it's out there. Josh, do you trade seeds? How do you find your seeds? What's your feeling about this open market for seeds that are being sold on the internet everywhere?
Well, Colombia is pretty unique because we built basically the world's largest seed bank. Was the first part of the cannabis program there. They allowed entries from everywhere around the world, including from within the country. And so we have indigenous seed library that is all the landrace strains of Colombia, from Menguiche, Santa Marta Golden. I think there's like 5 landrace varieties there. So genetics rich in Colombia. But the problem has been getting the quality of genetics behind all of the flood of registered seeds that were registered. So, like any market, there's just a ton of counterfeit. When you're an experienced grower, the difference between a well-prepared F1 seed and somebody's garbage, and it's kind of everywhere in between. And it's a Wild West in Colombia, just like a lot of places where everybody's got the best seed and they've got paperwork and COAs and all the great things. And it's a lot of just trial and error. That's really, I don't have favorite varieties because things change so much, and I stay ready for whatever grows best in an area may not work best indoors for somebody else halfway around the world. So I think I'm pretty fluid. I have probably 40 varieties just on hand that we kind of work amongst, but pharmaceutical varieties, there's probably only about a dozen, I think, in the world that really meet all of the quality standards and that you can consistently get THC and THCA and all these other, derivatives that people want. We're, as cultivators, we're just kind of driven to grow what the market wants, right? So genetics is kind of a big mix match for me. I'm more into mixing our land races into some of the really highly productive varieties and planting them in native places and with indigenous communities, and kind of bring the benefits of landrace strains, but also bringing quality and really high levels of cannabinoids in the same zones, because the real world's tough, and when you put real plants out into the real world, they get their ass kicked, and they don't look like the pictures, that you got in the magazine. They're often horrible. In Colombia, we have suffered a lot of bad crops just because of weather and bugs, and the learning curve of teaching communities how to grow really high quality crops is some in the genetics, but also some in how we take care of them. But most of it is getting great seed. When we get great seed in our hands, we can do good things with it. But having good providers and breeders and constant influx of fresh F1 ready to go seed, that's the key, I think.
Chris and Nathan, you guys are more in that European, international world, and far more. What's your read on the genetics market? It's an open. You mentioned derivatives. It's almost like futures, isn't it? How they use it?
It's an incredible area. Josh, happy to connect after and introduce you to Brian from Mother Labs, just as an example, who's are actually a nursery that are growing cannabis 6 and 10 inch to supply cultivators so that they can expedite the grow cycles. But they've really focused on tissue cultures, so that tissue cultures actually been traded around the world. So it's not even seeds that are moving from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because tissue cultures are actually have tradable commodity because they're not a germinating seed. Therefore, you can't grow cannabis plants without something on the other side of it. So there's some really interesting development where people are actually owning genetics at a tissue culture environment. And you're seeing some real standardization about that flow of product back and forth at a genetic level instead of a seed-based level. And again, that's another area where standardization is going to happen. And that's going to be very interesting to see what that does, especially as Josh identified on the pharmaceutical side, because there's going to be certain genetics that certain companies are going to want more than others. And I think it's going to be, one of the great arms races is who owns the genetic patents on those tissue cultures that are the things that are the products that people truly want.
Wow. Chris, this whole thing boggles my mind. It really does. Just because we're still so much at the beginning of the whole thing, right?
Are we? I mean, yes and no, right? I have clients in India who have cultivation facilities, and I talk to them, and they've been doing this, for thousands of years. The fact that we hit a pause button for over a century and sort of screwed it up doesn't mean that we're at the beginning. What it means is we're at a reset of sort of educating people and informing people on what the plants can do and how the cannabinoids all work. So I think Josh's comment was the best one, which is, in the real world, it's hard. And so there's a lot of, whether it's seeds or cultivation optimization practices, whatever that is, all of those things are being effectively traded around the world to figure out what best practices are. And to Nathan's point, sort of which ones are going to produce the best for what the world's population needs now. So we'll just have to see. But yeah, I do always have to remind people when we say we're at the beginning of something that just because our generation is one that gets to hit the reset button doesn't mean in other parts of the world this hasn't been ongoing for a very, very, very long time.
Chris, do you remember the 60s?
Can I add one piece? Because I think there's one bolt on.
Of course, Nathan, we'd never be able to stop you anyway. There's always there.
I love it when he says
one of the great opportunities is ancillary businesses. To Chris's point, it's all of those businesses who help those 1,000-year cultivators who are now looking at this as an economic opportunity that can flow across borders without worried about seeds or legality and something like that. And that's a really interesting thing. So I completely agree with Chris. I just think new companies, to Josh's point, like how are you using pesticides? Are you using herbicides? How are you doing it? Soil, all of that stuff is now being bolted on to an illicit sector where legitimate businesses are now like, holy crap, I can make money off this thing. So how am I going to do that? And I think that's a little bit of a new perspective.
Yeah. And by the way,
and I'll just say that,
go ahead, Josh.
For me, Colombia, that was the lesson I learned was why am I trying to teach? There are a lot of things that we do have to teach them in terms of compliance and quality, but I really stopped to say, what can I learn? And I've worked with indigenous Colombians now for almost 5 years, and the products they've shown me are so much better in so many ways than what I see in our own recreational and medicinal markets. And they've been creating oil-based tinctures and doing extractions for, like you were saying, India, Chris, 1,000 years. You know, this is stuff that is so beyond us. And for me, I've had to just step back and say, how can I just help these people do what they've already been doing? How can I, you know, partner up and bring them to the right markets and bring them into recreational markets and into medicinal markets in Europe, and just stay out of their way and really just keep their certification and show them how to maintain certification in a grow. And to me, that is truly doing the right work and not teaching other countries how to do what we do, but actually bringing what they do to our markets. You know, I think that's truly the gift. You know?
Sounds like cannabis tourism, right? Local cannabis at a local destination, infused by locals, and either local foods or something that you can only consume in that jurisdiction. That's a really exciting opportunity as well.
Right. And by the way, the next half hour, we are expecting to talk a little bit about cannabis tourism with Keiko Beatie, I think it's Beatie, from the Coral Cove, Jamaican area. And I met her a couple of years ago at MJ Biz, and I just thinking of international, I happen to think that cannabis tourism is probably the most untapped in the business that's just starting to get tapped now. And I think, you know, destination dispensaries, destination locations for education, wellness retreats, all that stuff, that's in play. And as soon as the pandemic is over, whenever that is, right, and they open up travel again to everybody to different countries, I'm really interested to see the growth for that, literally and figuratively. Like I would think, Josh, hanging out in Colombia for a week and learning from the indigenous people of Colombia would be a fascinating trip for anybody who's into this at all.
Yeah, right? Yeah, no, and I think that my biggest approach is in education, and we're kind of combining tourism and education in a lot of ways to kind of put on entire education programs for workers and support, you know, kind of a different career path for people. And I think that that's also just a marketing piece for a lot of our growers, that they are taking part in education, that they're showing people how to grow cannabis. And so that's drawn in a ton of Canadian folks, a ton of, I don't know, I see people from every country when I work in Colombia, people that are visiting. And I'm always at least given a little bit of comfort that there are people that still want to come to Colombia and that it's still an interest, and maybe we can change that. You know, there are people that travel there from Germany for their medicine. I've seen multiple tourist births. People come there to give birth with the different types of holistic doctors, and there's just so many different cool treatments and things that I've learned about there that make me wonder if my own healthcare really is that great. You know, when I see the outcomes and people there getting, you know, that they're paying a fraction of the price and they're getting better outcomes and better treatment and better health. So I'm often reminded that our American system isn't as great, you know, and I know that was started on tourism, but you know, I think there's a mix between tourism, education, and how we're creating cannabis grow situations that can, you know, keep drawing people in and not just be a detractor for a country like Colombia.
Well, I'll tell you, the three of you guys, I could listen to you talk to each other all day, to be honest with you. Chris Day, Josh Hardin, and Nathan Mison, again, thank you for coming on this half hour. And this is something we always do. And I'll be perfectly honest, until I know who's coming in the next half hour, I have no idea who's going to show up. So if you want to hang on and listen to our director, Dan French, who controls the room, if you will, you're more than welcome to do that through this break. I thank you, all three of you, for coming on. I definitely want to follow up with each one of you to talk about, and Josh, especially you, the new show that we're launching February 9th called Calling All Growers. And by the way, one of the best episodes of Growing Belushi is when he went to Colombia in search of the Blues Brothers strains that he's now growing in Oregon. And, you know, the whole world, it's getting smaller, and it's getting more and more interesting. So I'm going to say thank you, and then I want to take a break, and we'll come back. And if you guys are here, we'd love to have you. If not, totally understand. We continue with Green Rush Live from an international perspective after this.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
I'm a fan. That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free. If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
All right, welcome back to the final half hour of Green Rush Live, our regular cannabis business talk show on Friday afternoon here in the East Coast on Pro Cannabis Media. This week, we are talking about international and all the international items and policies and rules and regulations. And we've got 3 new guests, all coming from different parts of the world, which I love. And yes, even Michigan. And Rick Thompson is my co-host today. And Rick, I appreciate you coming on always. You know that.
Thanks for acknowledging us as part of the world. I appreciate that.
Hey, the Midwest, I'm going to tell you, I've said this before. I have never met somebody that's a jerk from the Midwest. And I know they exist, Rick. Okay. I get it. All right. But mostly, especially the people in Chicago and they're the nicest people I've met. You know, they don't have that East Coast edge, if you catch my drift, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Let's introduce our three panelists, if you will, on the program today. Keiko Beatie is the Director of Education and Outreach of Coral Cove Wellness Resort, but I also know you spend a lot of time in Orange County, California. Am I right?
I do, and that's where I'm at right now, but my heart is definitely global cannabis, and psychedelics. So such an honor to be here with you, Jimmy, and thank you so much to Pro Cannabis Media.
Well, thank you for those nice words as well. And Michael Sassano is the founder. Did I say that right, Michael?
You got it right.
Sassano is the CEO and chairman of Somai Pharmaceuticals. So far, I got everything pronounced correctly, right?
You got everything right. You guys got me in Lisbon tonight. It's verging on 11 o'clock. I'm ready for you.
I appreciate that. And I know the hour difference and all that. And again, thank you for taking your time. Michael, let's start with you since, I don't want you to fall asleep halfway through this half hour. We do have that tendency for some people. Anyway, tell us a little bit about what your business is in pharmaceuticals and how it relates to the cannabis industry.
Europe's very, very direct. It's a pharmaceutical business. It's a medical business. Everything's about medical APIs. Pharmaceutical APIs. So that's where we lie over here in Europe, and of course you're seeing recreational come, and that's going to sweep around just like it did in the United States.
We're actually part of that now. I'm not sure how quickly that's happening, but I'm coming from Massachusetts. Rick is coming from Michigan, and we are legal adult use states here. Michigan, I think Michigan, you guys were before Massachusetts?
18.
Yeah. So the same year. And Martin Condon is with us too. He hosts Martin's World podcast from Ireland. And we love when he comes on our show just to listen to his awesome accent and also your insight on this industry. Socialized medicine dominates the European scene, and it truly is a medicinal product in Europe until barriers come down. Martin, what's your view? How are things moving in that direction? Certainly in Ireland, which I know is always a challenge for you guys.
Yeah, well, I suppose, Jimmy, we just had a meeting the other night with the TD, Gino Kenny, and it's about the medical cannabis access program in Ireland. And it's appalling to report that there's still only 4 products available under the medical cannabis access program. And the most appalling thing, Jimmy, is 1 patient has gotten access through the medical cannabis access program in Ireland. So you have 4 products, 1 patient, and they've been talking about this program since 2017. So they've been talking about this program so long that the program is due to expire now later this year. It was supposed to be a 5-year program, and it's appalling, Jimmy. They have 3 conditions listed on there, and there's extreme conditions, refractory conditions where they have to exhaust all the other medicines before they get access to cannabis. But still, only just recently we had cannabis flowers, cannabis floss finally added to the list of products which will benefit patients. But still, the stuff that there's people growing at home themselves, that's not medicine. And it's very interesting as well, Jimmy, to report in Ireland, we have a sitting lawmaker, a TD, whose husband was illegally using cannabis and got caught in possession of that cannabis and is now being brought through the courts and treated like a criminal for the self-treatment of their condition, which was epilepsy. So it's very interesting to see that all unfolding now at a time. And how it's playing out. So it's very interesting times here in Ireland. So
I'm glad you brought us up to date. And I do want to ask you, cannabis floss, like your teeth floss?
That's the word that they're using for it. Yes, similar, but 1S, not 2S. I think that the floss for your teeth is 2 S's.
Okay,
yes.
That's fine. So, and Keiko,
I think that might be a terminology that Michael uses with Sonomi. I think they use that terminology, cannabis floss, as one of the products they offer through the pharmaceutical range.
Go ahead, Michael.
I missed that one. Floss. Well, what is it? I'm doing my teeth.
Cannabis floss, as in cannabis flower.
I mean, Keiko, the educator here. Have you ever heard of Keiko?
I have heard of floss. I've never used it myself, but I'm sure it's very close to certain types of applications that are available. Is it derived from the kief, Martin?
No, it's the flower. It's the pharmaceutical term that they're trying to use in Ireland for cannabis flowers. So cannabis floss, and then there's a range of those. So Bedrocan are the company which have got a license to supply this flower to the Irish market. And under their cannabis floss, then that's a high THC variety of cannabis. But I thought I seen that listed as a product over on the Sonomi. Is that how you pronounce the name of that company? Their European branch that operates out of Portugal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different because the flowers we're making the extracts and the products based upon the extracts. So I get it. We're taking the flowers. We are grinding them down, extracting them, distilling them, and then creating herbal medicines based upon that. And so, I can see where we could be considered using the flower, but we're more basing the products off the flower.
Okay.
And that seems to be right. Keiko's nodding her head. Keiko, tell me a little bit, please, about your wellness resort, because one day I cannot wait to actually go on a vacation again. and it's in Jamaica. Am I right?
It is. It's in Jamaica. It's on the southwest side of the island, about 90 minutes away from Montego Bay and 30 minutes away from Negril. So we're right on the ocean front, and it's in a tiny fishing village called Little Bay. And was founded over 20 years ago, but it was about 5 years ago when we started moving forward with access to cannabis on the property. We now have a licensed dispensary, and we do a lot of education. Our CEO is a cannabis physician and surgeon, Dr. Adam Abaldili. And so we've put together an education program, and we're also involved with psychedelics as well, because in Jamaica, psychedelics are even more legal than cannabis is. And it's just been a wonderful journey to share that. But globally, we are associated with a cultivation in Jamaica called Jamaica Red Moon. And we were the first company to be exporting worldwide. So we have exported to Portugal, Switzerland, Germany, Australia, and most of them do turn it into tinctures and oil. But in Germany, I understand it is being sold as Jamaican flower, which is just really wonderful to know that the commerce, the industry has been developed where we can get good medicine to countries who are actually opening their borders to receive it. So that's what the good thing is. And it's so inspiring to hear what's happening in Ireland, Martin, for the patients there, because to me, I think a lot of us at our core, why we're doing this, why we're being here, is because we do want to see safe accessibility. So thank you, Martin.
Absolutely. And Rick, I'm sure after hearing what's going on in Ireland, you feel much better about living in Michigan, don't you?
Well, I do, but I just have one question for Martin. There's one person in Ireland authorized to get medical marijuana, but he's got to be the most popular guy in the country, right? I mean, everyone wants to be his friend, Big
this
Instagram
is under,
for that dude. Yes.
This is under the program, the Medical Cannabis Access Program. So there's another way to access cannabis in Ireland, and it's through the Minister for Health can sign off on a license, a special exemption, for which there has been 66 other licensees. So there's one plus 66. So the Medical Cannabis Access Program was set up to replace the ministerial license pathway, because that's much more of a kind of an arduous process to get through for the patients and the consultants. So they set up the Medical Cannabis Access Program, which to date has provided, as pointed out, very little access to cannabis. Yes, and still we see patients being dragged through the courts There was an elderly lady, again, I'm trying to recall her name, but she was 68. She had some problems with her arthritis and something else. There was another condition. I think she might have had some glaucoma happening as well. And she got dragged through the courts because she grew her own cannabis and she got caught. Her neighbor reported her. So the authorities showed up. They brought her to court. She's 68. She's not in the best of health. And the judge didn't, luckily, the judge didn't punish her, but still, nonetheless, it was 3 years from the point of getting caught to the point of the case finishing in the courts. So again, that's going to add its own stress onto a person's life. So we're still in a very strange place in Ireland where the courts are failing to recognize the medicinal use of cannabis and the lack of access that patients have here. And again, people are still being dragged through the courts. The guards, the police, they're not showing their discretion either in carrying out their job.
Yeah, look, Let's get back to Michael for a second here.
Yes,
you're in this pharmaceutical world. You know, in the United States, there's a fear if it goes federally legal that big pharma will come in and dictate policy and control and everything. But in Europe, because you've got socialized medicine, because you've got doctors, MDs prescribing this, it's more geared towards a pharmaceutical approach. Is that one of the reasons why you're over there?
I mean, absolutely. But, initially I came from the recreational and let's say early stage medical market from the West Coast, Las Vegas, when we were first opening up grows and production facilities and dispensaries back in 2015, 2016, this era. And, it was the same situation going on over there. It's not really that different. You have to try to apply it from the United States and try to look over here. So as an example, you have, Germany, well over 50,000 maybe plus patients this year. I mean, this is reminiscent of Florida in the early days. You have, the Netherlands. The Netherlands, has, an anemic amount of patients. But of course, they've had the recreational market. You have countries like Poland, and it's turning out 9,000 patients from almost, 1,500 last year. So there is growth, and the UK is now, probably they'll ring in the bell at about 13,000 patients this year. So definitely, like, the countries are slowly starting over here to have the access, and that's mostly because back in the late 2020, when the UN voted that cannabis is a medicine. Now that they voted, and by the way, that's a lot more than the United States has voted. So think about it that way. Europe's a little bit more progressive, but the regulatory agencies, the health agencies, they're just starting to get involved in this. So you have to give it a little bit of patience. And I know it's frustrating out of Ireland, a very strict market. So these kind of countries, they're going to take a little bit more time for their voting base, to be a little bit more accepting of the needs of the people. And that's what's really happening, is the people are designating this over here, and it's happening, pretty rapidly. And they're advancing from flowers to extracts and onwards.
Yeah, we might not have much longer to wait. And it'll be interesting to see if there's a bill coming before the Irish government this year from, again, Gino Kenny, to legalise cannabis recreationally for adult users. Now it seems that the verdict is that this bill is going to not go anywhere and it's going to fall flat in its face. But still, the opportunity is there nonetheless. So it'll be interesting to see if there will be a big push from the public, the voter base, because it seems like there's a lot of support out there right now for a change of the law and widening of access to cannabis for patients.
Hey, Rick, we don't have a problem with voting rights in this country, do we?
No, of course. And it's a set law. Nobody argues about anything. But what I'm hearing, and this has been a great series of conversations we've had today. Individual European nations have different rules regarding cannabis in much the same way individual American states have rules regarding cannabis too. And just as it would be very difficult to pass an international pact amongst all those nations that have so many divergent views on how cannabis should be administered to their people, that's where we struggle here in the United States, because we have so many divergent views on a state-to-state basis about what a national policy should look like.
Yeah,
and that's why we need to work on deschedulizing this federally.
Yes.
And that's one of my passions. I'm with NORML, and legislatively, we need to come together as a nation. I would like to be able to see commerce and accessibility from New York to California be equal, the same, and accessible, because patients are in need everywhere. And there are pockets here in the United States that have no access whatsoever. And then you have states like California and Washington and Colorado, which are, and many more that are adult use.
Yeah.
We have to come together.
I'd actually like to see the Senate look more like America, if you catch my drift, because they don't. And that's what bothers me big time. And obviously term limits would change all that. But I try not to get into politics because there isn't a left side that's big enough for me to fit in. Anyway, let's go back to Michael for a second here. What's the goal? Do you have any initiatives from a policy standpoint? I mean, how does it work in Europe as far as what we call lobbyists in this country who get paid to influence policy and in our republic, because we're not a true democracy anymore?
I mean, being that I'm American and I'm also European, carrying both passports, I see it from both sides. I would say from the American politics, they're trying to prevent this from happening. So big pharma, big alcohol, big tobacco, big distribution. Either they want a piece of it, they want a piece of the taxes, and somehow everything keeps getting stalled out. And really, all you need to do is provide safe banking for us, because there's no reason for my employees to endanger their lives carrying cash because you can't get your act together. Now, on the reverse side, you come over here to Europe, it's very civilized. We fall into the pharmaceutical, the medical standards, and this is the way it is. Now, of course, as been pointed out, you wish there was a lot more access similar to Colorado and the West Coast. You want to be able to walk into a dispensary, a coffee shop, and be able to purchase it. But their mindset isn't there. But they've agreed, beyond what the United States has agreed, they've agreed that, hey, this is a medicine. Now let's get the medicine out there. And now the confusion is, how do we get doctors to prescribe it? How do we get this to be rolled out? How does this work in our systems? And, that's an even slower process, because you're on the medical world, you're on the pharmaceutical world, rather than hey, we've decided as a state we're going through with this. We don't care what the federal government's saying, So, it is a frustrating path, but it's still a much wider path, with a bigger distribution path. So, pluses and minuses.
That seems to be the mantra of the cannabis advocacy groups out there. Keiko, you mentioned NORML. It is always a challenge. I just don't know how we're going to heal from this division in our country right now. And the fact that cannabis, of all things, is in the middle of a political debate, it again boggles my mind. But we're 100% behind the decriminalization and opening up the damn banks. To me, if we could do that alone and then leave it up to the states, everybody would be happy. Look, at least on this show, they would be.
And Jimmy, I think one thing that I always keep close to me is that to reach out and educate the mainstream, make it palatable for them to know that this is just a simple plant.
Right.
And that is able, with the endocannabinoids in it, to help the human body balance itself back to wholeness and wellness. And Martin, I want to say, when you say the elderly woman at 68, you know what?
I'm glad you picked up on that too, Keiko. I'm 64. Okay, so I didn't think I was that close to being elderly, although my friends would not agree.
Well,
she's old enough
I'm
for her
way,
bus pass.
I'm way older than that. So, and what is age? Age is just a number, but Martin's
Yes,
probably
I agree with you there,
young or
Keiko.
young. Anyway, that's okay. I think
And by the
one of-
way, Keiko, you look terrific no matter what age you're at. You know what I mean? I don't care about the number. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
I suppose I would have said that in the most respectful of ways, as in respect to the person and
Martin.
contribution to the community.
With that accent, you can get away with anything, Martin.
That's
okay?
right.
I'm going to tell you that right now.
One place that you have to be open to for education, for finding the best demographics for wanting to learn and accept, actually are the elderly, the seniors. The seniors' bodies are looking for what's going to make them feel better. They kind of remember it from the 60s, so it could be a throwback, but yet now that they've seen that the legalities are opening up, they are finding themselves more open to learning more about medical access and just access and just knowing what's going to help them with their anxiety, their depression, their sleeplessness, and the list can go on, arthritis. So, and yes, Martin, those are things that elderly women experience.
Absolutely. Let's go right around the room here for final thoughts on this. I'm going to start with Rick because he's been here for the last couple of hours and he's been listening to a lot of different thoughts and ideas from different parts of the world. The second half hour I thought was brilliant, but wait, third half. Whatever it was a little while ago. Rick, what's your impressions about what's going on in the international scene? Have you taken away anything from listening to the panelists that we've had on today?
Well, one thing I will say is that we talked a lot about agriculture in the previous half hour, genetics and growing and the differences between what's going on in Colombia and what's going on in Europe. We're at a unique moment in time for agriculture because now a tissue sample created in Alberta can be in Australia within 2 days. And we can actually trade knowledge, genetics, and technology across borders in a much faster way than we did before. So when we stop thinking about cannabis as a global human experience and start thinking about it as just a regional or geographic or an inter-nation kind of a thing, I think we lose the proper focus on the plant and its ability to help Earth.
Everybody. That's right. That's why if you've ever seen the logo for It's a Whole New World of Weed, I have a cannabis plant surrounding the globe because I really do believe that this plant was put on this earth. And I learned this from a Rastafarian in Jamaica, I might add, Keiko, that it is all about a plant. God put it on this earth for a reason, for medicinal reasons. It's just that it also can be fun from an adult use recreational side if it's done responsibly, but it's all about education. Keiko, some closing thoughts from you, if you don't mind.
Well, one thing I didn't say about Coral Cove is that we are on the ocean and we offer kayaking, snorkeling, surfing, but most of all, we offer patients and just regular people to come and enjoy themselves. And we are looking at expanding to other properties worldwide. So to me, even though I may be here in California, I really look at globally the access and the more people who are able to learn about cannabis, and thanking so much for the cultivators, the definitely people working in the science and creating the great pharmaceuticals, Michael and Martin, you reaching out to the patients there in Ireland. It's wonderful. And Jimmy, Pro Cannabis Media, you have offered the public information that hopefully will assist us in all growing together in this world. So thank you.
You're welcome, and it's my pleasure. It's one of the most beautiful things we hear all the time now from other people. Martin, last thoughts, if you don't mind.
Well, Jimmy, thanks for having me on. And I think just the point in the what Keiko said earlier on the descheduling of cannabis, if I can just echo that again, I think that's an incredibly important task. And it's one that I'll continue to be tackling here in Ireland at a national level. And if I can achieve that here within my own country, I'll continue to push that on a global level because cannabis is a plant that can offer a lot of help, not only to the planet, but to the people who occupy this planet. And to unlock that, I think we've to stop this prohibition globally. not just nationally, but globally. So thanks for bringing that up, Keiko. And I just wanted to take my final thought to echo on that.
Thank you so much. And Michael, a final thought from you.
Yeah, I mean, just to, echoing everything, I think the really big thing is education. Education on all different levels. So if you're a doctor, you need education on his level. If you're, an adult use patient, and I believe 90+% of adult use people are trying to solve something from anxiety or pain or whatever it is, whatever those angles, whether it's this side or that side, it's the education and making a product that's acceptable for them and that makes sense for their minds. And echoing also that the fact that, look, it could be my 80-year-old parents who have other issues, whether it's, the fact that they're looking at it from a point of arthritis or Meniere's or whatever their indications are. Well, there's people that are trying it and there's doctors that are trying hard to understand it. And let's, keep being patient with everybody and keep pushing from all angles to make this happen.
Absolutely. Thank you all for taking the time today, especially Michael staying up till midnight. I really appreciate that. And needless to say, the next time we talk, we can talk on your time zone, if that's okay with you. Thank you again. Rick Thompson, always a pleasure. Appreciate it. And we'll see you every week on Weed Talk News. A reminder that is coming up next following this live stream is our regular roundup of the news of the past week in the cannabis space. We have about 11 different correspondents from different states. And of course, we have Steve George from Europe providing analysis and insight into that market too. So for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, thank you so much for watching. And remember, it is a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Coming up on Weed Talk News this week, weed tax passes booze tax in Massachusetts. It's not the only state that is seeing this trend. Mississippi gets one step closer to becoming the 37th in the nation to decriminalize cannabis and start a medical program. President Biden's home state of Delaware moves towards legalization while he doesn't move on federal reform. And Growin' Belushi is back, as Jim Belushi calls for the release of all incarcerated cannabis violators on Seth Meyers' late night show. Weed Talk News is next. Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media, and welcome to this week's episode of Weed Talk News. If you needed any more convincing that cannabis is here to stay, look no further than Massachusetts. The Bay State has allowed adult use cannabis sales for the past 5 years, but for the first time, weed is now beating out booze when it comes to bringing in tax revenue. So with a closer look at the dollars pouring in and more from the Bay State, Ron Marshalsea kicks things off with this week's Massachusetts Report.
I'm Ron Marshalsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. State data shows Massachusetts is officially collecting more tax revenue from marijuana than alcohol. As of December 2021, the state took in $51.3 million from alcohol taxes and $74.2 million from cannabis at the halfway point of the fiscal year. The Bay State has seen overall $2.54 billion in adult use marijuana purchases since November 2018. And according to a report released by the Marijuana Policy Project earlier this month, states that have legalized marijuana have collectively garnered more than $10 billion in cannabis tax revenue since the first licensed sales started in 2014. Now that the slopes of the Northeast are covered in snow again, some of you may want to get back out and ski, and some will do it with a little bit of cannabis in their system, but obviously not too much. But if you do, the ice water hash infused edibles that you can pick up at Canna Provisions in the Berkshires pairs well with a day on the slopes. The ice water hash is like your ticket to all the good stuff from the plant without any solvents or chemicals used in extraction. Whether you're new to the slopes or a veteran of them, Canna Provisions suggests these to bring a full body effect with consistent dosing and fantastic flavor. And finally, NECAN will have a special guest delivering the keynote speech at NECAN Boston on Saturday, March 19th. The guest is the father of the legal industry himself, Mr. Steve D'Angelo. Steve D'Angelo is the founder of the Last Prisoner Project and one of the nation's premier cannabis advocates. The 2022 New England Cannabis Convention will be at the Heinz Convention Center from March 18th to the 22nd. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For Weed Talk News, I'm Ron Marshalsea.
President Joe Biden continues to get ripped by cannabis advocates for not living up to his promises on reforming policy. Meanwhile, his home state of Delaware is now looking likely to legalize the plant before he does. Delaware's House Health and Human Development Committee has voted in favor of a bill that would legalize cannabis for adults 21 and older. The committee approved a similar measure last year, but it ultimately stalled ahead of an expected floor vote due to disagreements over social equity provisions. But it looks like the proposal has been tweaked and strengthened and will now be considered by Delaware's legislative bodies. Staying in the Northeast for now, Jessie Lynn Dolan has this week's Vermont Report.
This is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Vermont's Cannabis Control Board is wrapping up its work on Rules 1 and 2 for adult use sales and moving on to Rules 3 and 4 with a particular focus on accessibility for small cultivators and removing many of their restrictive mandates. They started facilitating bi-weekly peer-to-peer networking sessions for social equity and economic empowerment applicants, with the first topic on building relationships with local government, navigating permitting process, and key elements to a successful business plan. They're also looking at fee proposals for licenses yet to be decided by the legislator, such as on-site consumption lounges, delivery, and special events. A new advocacy group called the Green Mountain Patients Alliance has sparked. GMPA is a group of Vermont cannabis patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals advocating for fair and equitable access to clean and affordable cannabis for medical use. Founded by Jeffrey of Vermont Growers Association, Amelia, patient advocate, and myself with the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association, Activate is a virtual series dedicated to giving updates on the medical program and spotlighting local patients, caregivers, and cannabis healthcare professionals. GMPA is hosting the first episode of its monthly Zoom series, Activate, on Monday, January 31st at 7 to wrap up 2021 by discussing their successes, compromises, and what's coming up in cannabis legislation for 2022. A special election in the town of Ludlow ended in a second rejection of retail cannabis. The vote against retail echoed an earlier November vote, which also ended in defeat. To date, more than 30 Vermont cities and towns have opted to allow cannabis dispensaries within their limits, and the March 1st town meeting day vote will have a significant impact on the face of retail cannabis sales in the state. Cannabis Control Board member Julie Holberd recently told Heady Vermont that Vermont's cannabis law prohibits cities and towns from creating special conditions or rules for cannabis businesses, or using their zoning or ordinance power, I quote, in a way that will have the effect of prohibiting the operation of cannabis establishments. COVID-19 conspiracy theorist and Vermont state candidate Kerry Raheb has been making the news in Massachusetts by trying to open a retail cannabis business in the town of Adams, where he proposes to give the money to the police, fire departments, and the community development office in the first year of operation. He also says that if elected to Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy's vacated seat, he'll give $250,000 of his salaries back to Vermonters, though he doesn't say how he plans to do that. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
Pot smoking politicians may just be the new normal. On the heels of Louisiana candidate Gary Chambers' campaign ad drop, you know, the one where he's smoking that giant blunt in a field. Well, a new survey from YouGov surveyed about 4,100 adults, and 58% of them said they would be willing to vote for a candidate who they agree with on most issues and who occasionally smokes marijuana in their free time. So cannabis now creeping into the congressional halls. Yet another example of how it's here to stay. Now let's head over to Washington, D.C. and check in with Vote Pro Podcast's Phil Adams.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC report. Amazon is backing a Republican bill to end the federal prohibition of cannabis. The online retail giant this week announced its endorsement of the States Reform Act as an alternative to the more comprehensive Democrat-led legalization bills and a more restrictive GOP rescheduling proposal. The States Reform Act would deschedule cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, expunge prior marijuana convictions, and impose a 3% federal excise tax on cannabis products. Last June, Amazon ended its policy of marijuana drug screening for many of its employees and began actively lobbying Congress to end cannabis prohibition. The company has already endorsed the MORE Act introduced in the House and its Senate counterpart, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. The States Reform Act was introduced last November by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. A new poll finds that a majority of Americans would vote for a candidate who smokes marijuana. The YouGov survey, which comes in the wake of a campaign ad showing Senate candidate Kerry Chambers smoking a blunt, involved interviews with more than 4,000 U.S. adults. It found that 58% of Americans overall would be willing to vote for a candidate with whom they agree on most issues, who occasionally smokes marijuana in their free time. This includes 47% of Republicans, 68% of Democrats, and 62% of independents. Federal financial regulator Rodney Hood says financial institutions should prepare now for what he sees as a, quote, bright future for the cannabis industry. Hood's comments were made in an interview at the PBC conference last fall. In the interview, which was released this week, the National Credit Union Administration board member said that while he believes federal legalization is inevitable, the cannabis industry in the meantime remains underserved by the financial services sector. Hood also spoke about what he calls the prohibition mindset that continues to make banks and credit unions skittish about serving the legal cannabis industry, and called on Congress to pass legislation protecting institutions that serve cannabis businesses. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Actor and cannabis entrepreneur Jim Belushi used an appearance on Late Night with Seth Meyers this week to not only promote his new Grow show, but also to call out all that's still wrong about cannabis incarceration. While talking about his new Discovery show, Growing Belushi, a show about the actor's cannabis farm in Southern Oregon, he took a stance for farmers and those who are currently behind bars for cannabis, who he called pioneers of the industry.
Hey, I want to talk about some of your charitable work, and I know we discussed this last time, but the Last Prisoner Project is something you're involved with that is actually, especially now that we're living in a world where we do have, legal, marijuana farms. Farmers like yourself, you're talking about it's just agriculture now, but we have so many people who are still in prison for their marijuana use.
Well, they were the pioneers for the cannabis industry. They're the ones that took the arrows. They're the ones that went to jail for non-violent cannabis crimes, whether they had, an ounce or 3 pounds on them. They were trying to make a living for their family. And when they get thrown into prison, it collapses that family, creates more trauma. There are 40,000 men and women incarcerated right now for non-violent cannabis crimes. So the Last Prisoner Project I do with Steve DeAngelo and Mary Bailey, we are writing letters to states. We've gotten a lot of people out. We got Richard DeLucy out of Florida. He was in jail for 32 years, the longest cannabis, guy incarcerated, and he's free. And so it's happening. It's happening. The state's attorneys are the people that we're really trying to hit, and it's moving along, but it never stops. So if you want to write or donate to the Last Prisoners Project, it'll be a good thing to do for your community and help these families come back together.
You can catch more of Belushi in the second season of his show Wednesday nights on Discovery. While the legal bud industry seems to be booming in the Midwest, there's now a back and forth battle brewing over unionization in dispensaries. Shops in Ohio, Illinois, and Missouri all have seen instances of votes to unionize dispensary employees, but it seems some are now backing out. While some in Ohio blame vote delays on the Postal Service, other shops in Missouri who plan to unionize are staying mum on why they've changed their minds or delayed a vote. With more happening in the Show Me State this week, let's check in with Brandon Jones for this week's Missouri Report.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones again from Distribution Maven with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. And yeah, we thought unionization was coming on pretty quickly here in Missouri, and then all of a sudden a big pause. So I will put some research in for next week and ask the back channels and see what I can come up with why this was paused so quickly and why nobody's talking about it. My first story today comes out of Marijuana Moment. It's talking about the legalization makes differing approaches to expungement. And that's kind of what I want to focus on today is just the three differences between the expungement cases. So for legal Missouri, they want to be on a timeline where misdemeanors are done first, and then the harder cases would be done, obviously in a timeline. The biggest thing there is anybody over 3 pounds would not get expungement and would not be released. So that's a pretty serious thing that, would not be letting those people out. For Fair Access Missouri, they would actually make every single person file a petition and pay a $100 fee to get expungement. And finally, Cannabis Patient Network would require that after 60 days of passing that everyone would require expungement. So 3 big differences: legal Missouri on a timeline, Fair Access Missouri would be everyone have to have their own petition and pay a $100 fee. And then finally, Cannabis Patient Network, everyone would get expungement after 60 days. My second story today is talking about a reversing decision here in Missouri on a license inquiry. So if you knew quite a bit of issues happened in 2019 when people were trying to acquire their license. But here, NWGMO actually submitted 2 identical cases to see if they could get approval, and they got completely different scores turned back in. So under this, they sort of served this back in, and finally this got overturned here in December. So if you have an airtight case, you can turn it in. They are overturning some cases. It's only the 4th here in Missouri, but it is happening. So make sure you're doing your due diligence and see if you can get your licenses approved. Again, this is Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Have a great weekend, everybody.
We recently reported an uptick of calls to poison control centers in Illinois, mainly due to edibles. Well, this is proving to possibly set a dangerous precedent for the industry. One Illinois lawmaker has introduced a new bill that would limit the amount of THC allowed in legal pot products, capping flower at just 10% THC and concentrates at 15%. Thomas Howard takes a closer look at what's happening in Illinois this week. Thomas.
Hi, I'm Tom Howard with Weed Talk News, here to give you an update on what happened in Illinois weed last week. Well, there was a hearing on that large case that's holding up 185 dispensaries, and it looks like maybe by May, that case might be over. There's a hearing and a deadline on April 29th for the state to start turning over certain amounts of, administrative review record, but there's also a plan for them to start settlement negotiations if that gets anywhere. If not, there's going to be another hearing in about a month, and there are some responses due by the state next month as well that have to be put on file. However, it is movement, and so those 185 dispensaries will be here one day, hopefully in 2022. Also, the legislature is back in session, and there's been a bill to limit the amount of THC in cannabis. A Republican legislature from Plainfield introduced a bill to cap THC levels on cannabis flower at 10%. However, it's not all bad news. There was just a bill introduced that would allow for home grow for average people that are above 21, not just medical patients. And also there was a bill that was just introduced today that has a outdoor cultivation allowance. They're going to change the definition of where your canopy can be to include outdoor, which is scary if you consider that a craft grows maximum canopy space is 14,000 square foot, and a larger MSO's or a cultivation center's canopy space is 210,000 square feet. So the Croptober might just shatter all the prices, and then who knows what that'll do to the industry that is in the state if that bill passes. It may also behoove you to understand that Curaleaf's counterclaim suit against former subsidiary CMO has been allowed to progress, and both parties get into potentially embarrassing discovery, because discovery potentially can be embarrassing depending on what facts are in that record. That's one of the reasons why motions to dismiss are one of the first things that are filed in courts, if the person even accepts service. This is a lawsuit by a former CMO, that's the chief marketing officer for the Chicago-based Grassroots Cannabis, and they are suing Curaleaf, which purchased Grassroots in 2020, for breach of contracts because Liz Hurwitz, the former CMO, charges that she did not receive the promised level of compensation as executives received when Grassroots was purchased by Curaleaf. Sometimes you have to enforce those contracts that are very sophisticated in this cannabis industry in a court of law. It happens quite often. There'd be a lot more cause for me to be in court if 185 dispensaries were not held up in court right now. Anyway, my name's Tom. You can find me at CannabisIndustryLawyer.com or on YouTube at Cannabis Legalization News.
While advocates in Florida push for adult use access and sales to cannabis, the state's governor is getting some smoke blown his way for comments he made about why he may be against legalization. At a campaign event this week, Ron DeSantis avoided directly answering why he doesn't want the plant legalized for adults, but he did say he hated the, quote, putrid stench around places that allow public consumption. Maybe someone can let the governor know there are other ways to consume the plant besides smoking. But with that, let's check in with Heather Allman for more from the Sunshine State.
Thank you, Elena. I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report with this week's Florida report for Weed Talk News. 5 years into medical cannabis legalization, and according to Sergeant Brandon Finley of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office Drug Force, black market sales of marijuana have not slowed down due to price. While patients pay an average of $15 a gram at legal dispensaries, the illicit price tag runs lower. Many consumers are simply in search of cheaper weed, but turning to the black market comes with higher risk because there's no lab testing, obviously. You get what you get. There is a bill that lawmakers are looking at this session that addresses the oppressive cost of cannabis, and in this effort might finally put a damper on illegal sales. And speaking of sales, while we've pivoted to 2024 for full legalization here in Florida, Headset released a report on the current state of U.S. cannabis legislation. With active bills and new markets coming online, they projected that legal cannabis sales could reach $46 billion by 2025. Despite having a medical-only program and a handful of operators, Florida has a population of adults that are age 21 and older that exceeds 16 million, and our sales are expected to reach $3.2 billion annually by 2025. This will make Florida the second largest in cannabis sales, only to California as number one. In hot pursuit of a larger piece of this Florida market is Curaleaf, who has quickly expanded their retail and cultivation footprint in the state, making significant gains in the last year by doubling their market share and bringing additional dispensaries online, including 2 in the last week alone. Curaleaf President Matt Darren promises continued growth and expansion this year, along with new innovative products. That's a wrap for Florida Cannabis this week. I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report for Weed Talk News.
A new report says cannabis companies in Pennsylvania are being sidelined in the state's legal game. The report from a Cantor Fitzgerald analyst found publicly traded and private MSOs now control 83% of medical marijuana stores in Pennsylvania, pushing the little guy largely to the side for now. With more happening in Pennsylvania this week, here's Claudia Post.
Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm right here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. First up, Norman Yoder, of course, a name you would all know, a 1960s state commissioner for the blind, claimed half a dozen Pennsylvania college students took LSD and stared at the sun and were completely blind after that experience. And guess what? The newspapers believed him This is what happened to all this. Anyway, he made up this story because he thought it would scare others from taking LSD. The governor launched an investigation and found out that was a hoax. However, a PA state senator decided against all evidence to embrace the story and push it as truth. It's almost unbelievable. It was a perfect moral panic story to sell folks on being scared of psychedelic drugs and counterculture hippie people. Today, of course, psychedelics are becoming more and more mainstream. It's now common for them to be used in therapy sessions, and acceptance is growing around microdosing to deal with everyday life. And everyday life needs dealing with at this point. In Philly, the Sound Mind Center and Philadelphia Psychedelic Society each have hundreds of people on their waiting lists. Cannabis consumers seeking employment opportunities can now narrow the hunt thanks to a new search engine created by Damian Jordan, a Philadelphia entrepreneur. The name of the search engine is Finally. And what is this research and resource going to help our cannabis brothers and sisters? It's going to help them in their job search because it will list companies that are accepting and will not drug screen for onboarding purposes. That's really progress. Damian said, we want to match people with transparent employers who have transitioned out of old school policies and who know the future, of course, is legalization. And next up, I'm happy to report that the home grow bill has been presented. Finally, lots of discussion. It's finally been presented. It will allow patients here in Pennsylvania who are 21 or older and who have lived in the state for at least 30 days to purchase seeds from dispensaries and plant 6 plants in a very secure, locked space in their residence. Tremendous progress for home grow. So that's a wrap for this week for our Pennsylvania Cannabis Report. I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. So from Weed Talk News, have a great week.
A bad batch of bud is prompting a massive recall on California shelves. The California Department of Cannabis Control says Headbanger flower sold by Claiborne Company between November and now is contaminated with black mold. Now they're asking customers to double check their packages of pot and throw out anything produced from the bad batch. Christopher Smith takes a closer look at what else is happening in this week's California report.
Thanks for the nice intro. Here's the 4th California Roundup for 2022 for Weed Talk News. It's almost February, which means the Sisters of the Valley are at it again. You may have heard of the hemp-bearing nuns from California's Central Valley, and between February and March this year, they will be mailing approximately 13,000 high CBD hemp seeds to 1,000 of their customers as a thank you. Sister Quinn says, we have a strong calling to be the Johnny Appleseed of the hemp industry and share our seeds. If we could sell them, we could make $1 million, but the seeds were a gift to us from the goddess, and we need to re-gift them to the people. Now in California, generosity like this is very normal. The Shangri-La Care Center, a longtime Southern California business, has lost a years-long legal battle to be reimbursed by its home county for what it contends were improper raids that confiscated and destroyed $75 million worth of cannabis in 2015 and 16. Some of the product was returned 4 years later, but of course by then it was ruined. The company didn't file for damages until 2020, and the judge said, too late. Hope their lawyers have insurance. Otherwise, Shangri-La is completely SOL. One of the major disasters of the California regulatory mess is provisional licensing, which are the business version of tricycles when other states are riding big boy bikes. As of July 1st, provisional licensing will be replaced with a new problem that will limit access by cannabis entrepreneurs. They will only be able to obtain an annual state license a process that could take months, if not years, before operations can commence. Or they can buy an existing licensed company, which is a speedier prospect that could boost merger and acquisition activity, but either way, the little guy gets screwed. A recent expose by the LA Times found that California has still not cleared 34,000 convictions as it was required to do under Prop 64. A public defender said, "For decades, the justice system quickly and enthusiastically destroyed the lives of men, women, and children accused of nonviolent marijuana offenses, and by the way, disproportionately harmed people of color while doing so." A bill submitted by Representative Mia Bonta and sponsored by the Last Prisoner Project, quote, simply requires the system to act with a similar enthusiasm and speed when giving the formerly convicted back their lives. And I'm Christopher Smith, publisher of the American Cannabis Report, sharing California surf, sunshine, smoke, and Sisters of the Valley for Weed Talk News.
The problem of pot shop robberies only seems to be getting worse in Washington state. One local advocate says he tracked at least 30 violent robberies since November, and many say the state's cannabis board isn't doing enough to protect business owners. So let's take a closer look at what's happening this week in Washington state. Here's Josh Kincaid.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. While Washington has one of the nation's most mature cannabis industries, the state's Liquor and Cannabis Board employs a gotcha culture. A follow-up from our report 2 weeks ago that licensed businesses in Washington state, particularly processing and retail operations, are expressing concerns that burdensome taxes and state regulations are hindering their ability to scale up due to a nationwide high excise tax of 37%. Washington state marks its 10-year milestone, and yet reforms are needed to address issues such as a high tax and a gotcha regulatory scheme, as well as a shortfall in minority participation. The regulatory hostility can be seen with the state's regulators cracking down on minor matters and penalizing cannabis operators more than their liquor and tobacco industry counterparts. A study was conducted last year and calculated the economic impact of adult use cannabis, totaling $2.7 billion in revenue and over 18,000 jobs in the state. Yet companies still face a funding squeeze. More needs to be done to make sure the state's cannabis industry is more competitive if and when the federal government legalizes cannabis. And despite that growth, the program's challenges impact the industry, such as Washington state struggling to adopt a model that embraces greater minority participation. Next week, you're going to find out about Washington state's arrest protection bill. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.
Cannabis-infused wines are set to hit the shelves of shops in Michigan. House of Saka, which makes alcohol-free cannabis-infused wines, announced a new partnership with Carbidex LLC Michigan, which will allow the beverages to be manufactured, distributed, and sold throughout the Wolverine state. And with that, let's check in with Michigan NORML Executive Director Rick Thompson for this week's Michigan Report.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. Well, a lot of things happened after the MI Legalized Coalition passed the adult use cannabis bill in 2018. With the help of Marijuana Policy Project and NORML of Michigan, our citizen-directed initiative collected more than enough signatures and grabbed a 56% vote in November of 2018. Almost immediately after our success, the Republican legislature rushed through a bill changing the rules which govern petitioning. It passed and was signed by the governor within 2 months of our success at the ballot box. Now, those changes included a geographic requirement that no more than 15% of signatures could originate from a single county, and that petition signature collectors had to register with the state before the clipboard could hit the streets. Now, those are unconstitutional provisions, the Michigan Supreme Court said in a ruling this week, and of course, we all said that at the time the bill was passed. The two other petition drives successfully made the ballot in 2018, including the redistricting proposal and the voters' rights laws. Now, this Supreme Court decision is a win for the people and the citizens-directed initiative process. Now, here's news you can use from the Upper Peninsula. Forsyth's Planning Commission unanimously approved a new cannabis medical and adult use retailer called the Baker Curtis Cannabis Company. On its own, this doesn't seem to be big news, and the Planning Commission isn't the final say on if a license is issued or not. But there is something noteworthy about this business. The building they'll be housed in is the former location of a Family Dollar store and a business called the Art of Massage. Hey, Baker Curtis, if you can figure out a way to incorporate all three business models together, you'll have a retail store I'd travel across the bridge to visit. Just saying. Oh, those people at the Addiction Center, they're trying to scare Americans about cannabis again. Now, this time, it's about children getting their hands on marijuana edibles. The Scare Center claims incidents of children accessing cannabis rose to 3,000 recorded episodes in 2020. Now, they admit there's never been a death recorded from youth consumption of cannabis products, and in only 15% of those incidents did the exposure rise to the level of moderate exposure. And the most at-risk group of children were those from 3 to 5 years of age. Now, symptoms of moderate exposure include agitation and drowsiness. Hey, Scare Center, this perfectly describes all kids from 3 to 5 years of age. Try finding a 3-year-old who isn't agitated by something their siblings do and who doesn't get drowsy every time they get put in a car seat. Now, the Scare Center suggests better labeling to keep kids away from cannabis products. I hate to break it to you, but kids at 3 years old can't read. I think the scare tactics are the real addiction of issue here. Now, maybe we should put a warning label on you, Addiction Center. And Michigan State University is continuing their research into cannabinoid treatments for COVID-19, according to a new report appearing at Cannabis Business Times. Now, the study is being performed in conjunction with GB Sciences, and it'll analyze the ability of cannabinoids to dampen viral hyperinflammatory responses. Now, these cellular responses are similar to what happens in cells during a COVID-19 infection. The goal is to put cannabis-based medicine at the site of an inflammatory response. And this is a follow-up to last year's study from the same research team into the use of cannabinoids to halt the destructive bodily response known as a cytokine storm. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
Overseas in Asia, Thailand continues to make waves with weed. This week, the country's narcotics board said it would remove cannabis from its official drug list, paving the way for people in Thailand to grow the plant themselves. Under the new rule, folks can grow plants at home after notifying the local government. It just can't be used for any commercial purposes without further licensing. And with more from the wide world of weed overseas, Stephen Arthur George has this week's European Report.
I'm Stephen Arthur George from Kai Advisors in Lisbon, Portugal. This is the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. As January comes to a close, the European cannabis market is gaining momentum. In the past 6 months, 3 European countries have made changes to cannabis regulations at an adult use level. Malta and Luxembourg being the first 2 countries, which now both allow the cultivation of cannabis at home. Germany was the biggest news of the last 6 months, where the new coalition government recently stated that they would move forward with the regulation of adult use cannabis. Down south in France, patients now have access to new medical cannabis products. Panaxia and Neuraxipharm announced the first export of sublingual tablets to France. These will be available to some of the 3,000 patients in the ongoing medical cannabis trial. If successful, there's said to be anywhere from 300 to 700,000 eligible patients in France. Also in France, the higher court removes the ban on CBD flowers. Less than a month after banning CBD flower sales, the ban has been removed. The French higher court removed the ban on Monday, saying it was disproportionate. It is unclear what action will be taken next, but for now, CBD flowers are again okay to be sold in France. That's the European Cannabis Report. I'm Stephen Arthur George from Kai Advisors, reporting for Weed Talk News.
And finally, the dog days of prohibition are over in Montana. As the state works to incorporate legal weed into everyday life, law enforcement agencies are looking down new paths for canines trained to sniff out weed. While new canines will not be trained to sniff out cannabis at all, there are some pups certainly on the force who know no other way of duty. So for now, they may occasionally go sniffing for the plant in places it's not allowed, like the county jail. But otherwise, they'll get to enjoy an early retirement until law agencies figure out the best way to retrain those snouts. It's certainly a whole new world of weed out there for us and the dogs, and remember to use it wisely. For now, I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media and Weed Talk News. We'll see you next week.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.